Judiciary Committee will come to order, and I'd like to defer initially to my colleague and friend, Senator Grassley.
Just for 15 seconds, I'd like to take a moment before hearing begins to acknowledge a terrible tragedy that occurred in Des Moines, Iowa yesterday. 3 teenagers were shot from a passing vehicle near East High School in Des Moines. One of those teenagers just died. I'm sure his family is heartbroken by this loss, and hundreds of community leaders and members are grieving. I know we'll be talking about threats and attacks on schools and houses of worship today. Ensuring all Americans are safe has never been more pressing than it is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. 10 years ago, a white supremacist walked into the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, opened fire, killing 6 worshipers in cold blood. At the time, it was one of the deadliest hate crimes in modern American history. In hindsight, it was just the latest in a wave of violent, hate-filled attacks. After the attack, I held a hearing on hate crimes and the threat of domestic terrorism. Sadly, decades later, this threat has only grown. I'd like to start the hearing with the video on the wave of hate crimes that swept our country.
Investigators say that a suspect entered the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, during its Sabbath morning service and took the rabbi and 3 others hostage.
We are following new reports this morning of bomb threats at historically black colleges and universities.
The neo-Nazi group attacked, pepper sprayed, beat up, and spit on a Jewish college student, reportedly because he had an Israeli flag icon on his license frame.
A terrifying 2 hours of hate crimes in New York City. All 7 women assaulted were Asian American.
Yesterday, I went into Spelman College University with a backpack on, 2 explosives in them. Because of this reason, there are too many black students in it.
We are getting a better idea of just how many bomb threats have been made against historically black colleges and universities and other institutions for that matter over the past few months. The FBI said since the beginning of the year, at least 57 HBCUs, houses of worship, and other institutions have been targeted. More than 30 FBI field offices are looking into the threats and investigating them as racially or ethnically motivated hate crimes.
That's more than 1 threat per day.
The prosecution found evidence saying all 3 had a history of racism.
No one had been convicted of a federal hate crime in the state of Georgia before today.
As they were hitting me and taking off my hijab, they continuously kept saying, "I got you now."
The woman talking about, I don't want this kind of person sitting in front of me.
Y'all sell y'all's people, you garbage.
I must continue to fight. I don't think others should go through the heartbreak that I've went through.
We're hardly 3 months into 2022, and already our nation has seen a spate of hate crime. In January, as was reported, a man entered a Texas synagogue, held 4 Jewish worshipers hostage at gunpoint. Thank goodness no worshipers were harmed, but that was due to the heroic acts of state, federal law enforcement, and Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker, who will join us today. A few weeks later, a number of Jewish-owned businesses and synagogues in my home state of Illinois were vandalized with anti-Semitic graffiti, including spray-painted swastikas. More than 24 historically black colleges and universities have received bomb threats in the last 2 months, including as recently as last week. The threat of violence hangs over the heads of thousands of students who are told to shelter in place instead of attending classes. These threats are investigated as hate crimes and domestic terrorism by the FBI. On February 23rd, a Texas man pleaded guilty to federal hate crime charges after brutally attacking an Asian family at Sam's Club, where he stabbed a 6-year-old child and his father yelling, "Get out of America." And 2 weeks ago, 3 men were convicted of federal hate crime charges in the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, a black man they chased and killed when he jogged through a suburban neighborhood in Georgia. The list goes on and on and on. This much is clear: no community in America is immune from violent acts of hate, and Congress cannot ignore the appalling rise in hate incidents we've seen recently. The FBI's most recent annual report revealed that hate crimes in 2020 were at the highest level since 2001, with more than 8,000 criminal incidents reported. These figures are sobering, but they don't tell the whole story. According to the Justice Department's Bureau of Statistics, there are actually hundreds of thousands of hate crimes across our country each year. Many are reported by victims, and when they are, state and federal police too often do not report the FBI. We have to address this reporting gap. When criminals attack our nation based on who they are, where they're from, how they pray, who they love, they have to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We must also be honest about the role of hateful rhetoric in fueling these violent acts. For too often in recent years, elected officials and prominent media personalities have stoked the embers of fear. Hate speech divides America. It preys on prejudice. It puts a target on the backs of members of marginalized community. It makes America less safe. It is especially dangerous given the growing threat of violent extremism, which FBI Director Chris Wray has called, quote, a close cousin of hate crimes. Last March, Director Wray told this committee that the threat of violent extremism is, quote, metastasizing across the country and not going away anytime soon. As I've said time and again, violence to advance political or ideological goals is unacceptable, no matter where on the spectrum it occurs. But we cannot have an honest discussion about hate crimes without acknowledging the role of violent white supremacists, which our intelligence and law enforcement agencies have said pose the most lethal domestic terror threat. The good news is this Congress has taken some steps in the right direction to respond to hate crimes. Last year, we passed and President Biden signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. Important bipartisan bill expanded the Justice Department toolkit for addressing the appalling rise in hate incidents targeting members of the AAPI community and other communities at risk. That legislation also included the Jabara Hauer No Hate Act, which will provide hate crime reporting and expand resources for victims. None of us are under the illusion that one bill or one committee hearing is a silver bullet for preventing hate crimes. There's more to do. And during today's hearings, I look forward to learning what we can do to better support the survivors of hate crime and the members of law enforcement who respond to that. With that, I turn to Senator Grassley.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Durbin, and welcome to our panelists. This is a very important hearing. The Republican side asked for this hearing back in April of last year. I'm glad we're doing it now. Hate crimes are rising as violent crime goes up in many cities across our country. We've all read horrible stories about attacks in New York, Los Angeles, and a lot of other places. There's been a disturbing rash of threats on historic Black college and universities. Attacks on Asian Americans and Jewish Americans continue at alarming rates. These crimes spread terror far beyond their direct victims. Threats on schools and attacks on houses of worship can intimidate an entire community when that community has been targeted. These crimes chill participation in the most important aspects of our daily lives. These crimes make us afraid to go to the very places where we should feel the most safe. This rise in hate crimes is deeply disturbing to all Americans. In the course of speaking with members of the Black, Asian American, and Jewish communities, I've received an outpouring of concern. I'll enter into the record today numerous letters from lawmakers, community organizations, and community leaders about this hate crime spike and how we can combat it. I'd like to recognize some of my guests here today, including UNCF and the Korean American Grassroots Conference. Thank you for sharing your concerns with me, and thank you for your important work. Congress can do much to call out these biased crimes. Congresswoman Steele with us here today and myself have led resolutions condemning hates of act against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Senator Cruz and Cornyn from Texas have led a resolution condemning anti-Semitic attack on synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. Senator Scott has led a resolution condemning these hateful threats on HBCUs, historic Black colleges and universities, and there's more that Congress can do. Last year, we passed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. I appreciate Senator Hirano's work with Senator Collins to improve the bill, and I appreciate her kind words on the contributions that I and others were able to make. We must now engage in oversight over the department's implementation of that act. One of the challenges in pursuing these crimes is being sure that law enforcement can recognize hate motive. It's therefore unfortunate the FBI refused our invitation to appear here today. The FBI appears to have to struggle at first to even recognize anti-Semitic motives in Colleyville attack. They also have been disorganized in their response to threats at these historic black colleges and universities. Staff, for myself and for Senator Durbin, worked together and appealed to the FBI to provide witness with knowledge at just about any level in the organization. That organization declined flat out. That's sad, very disappointing. I thank Senator Durbin for pressing with me for an FBI witness. And I hope we will continue rigorous oversight of the FBI's response to hate crimes. The rise in hate crimes coincides with a major rise in crime in many cities. Violence on the streets is up and sadly includes hate crimes as well. One theme that I've heard constantly in speaking with communities that have been targeted by these hate crimes is that the police are stretched thin. They're understaffed and challenged not only by real threats, but also hoaxes that prey on the deeply upsetting nature of hate crimes to achieve a maximum effect. In some cities, the police can't sweep the campus each time that there's a bomb threat against a historic black college and university. I've been informed by groups like Secure Community Network that when law enforcement is overburdened, and this places a terrible weight on houses of worship to provide for their own security. It's no surprise that hate crimes are up in cities where crime is up generally. I hope this hearing will be one of many that will examine all aspects of crime spike and how we can combat it. Thanks to our witnesses for being here today.
Thanks, Senator Grassley, and want to welcome back Senator Padilla. How you feel? You look good. Before we begin, let me briefly lay out the mechanics for today's hearings. First, we'll hear from our congressional colleagues, then I'll swear in Assistant Attorney General Clarke. We'll each have 5 minutes to question her after she makes an opening statement. Then a round of questions. There'll be a round of questions with a final panel. We'll once again have 5-minute limits to each round of questions by our membership. Welcoming Tim Scott of South Carolina. Senator Scott, thanks for being here. Congresswoman Michelle Steele of California. They're going to share their perspectives on this important topic. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the ranking member, Grassley, as well, for holding such an important hearing on a topic that is obviously growing in importance around this country right now. Certainly with a backdrop of increasing hate crimes around this country, it is important to note that we have finally, after 200 times, tried and they failed. This Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, frankly, in a nonpartisan fashion, just putting Americans beyond politics, passed the anti-lynching legislation that this Senate has passed 3 times in the last 3 years. It is good to see that it is on the way to the president's desk, and it sends a positive, powerful signal to those who have been the victim of lynching, the importance of what's happening today, and to their families as well. And so with that, I'd like to just note that as we think through the challenges that we're seeing on campuses around this country, and specifically speaking of HBCUs, we have to note, in fact, that you think about the professional class of African Americans who are college graduates, whether you're talking about teachers, doctors, lawyers, general officers in our military, nearly half of those individuals found their start at an HBCU. And so when you're talking about populating America with some of the brightest, most talented, gifted individuals who are willing to put their lives on the line, who are willing to serve this nation, HBCUs is the foundation for so much of that success. And so with that, I'd also note that when you think about that success, 8 HBCUs find their home in South Carolina. And so this is an issue that is incredibly important. And frankly, as I think about the impact that HBCUs are having as far as creating a very professional class of African Americans who are changing this country in a very positive way, I think about places like Kentucky State University, HBCU, with 40% of its student population are not Black. And so the diversity on college campuses that are HBCUs have never been more diverse than they are right now. But over the past few months, my heart has been heavy. Mr. Chairman, it's been broken by the number of calls on HBCU campuses, bomb threats, stopping in their tracks the students on campuses, alarming the law enforcement agencies in their areas, causing confusion, and once again, a loss of learning on those campuses. One of those campuses is Claflin University in the great state of South Carolina. A victim of such threats. Students were going about their everyday business, trying to get to classes, trying to do what students do on campuses every day. Being told to shelter in place, find safe haven, when you're just trying to learn. It's a devastating event that could easily scar you emotionally as well. As we've learned with this pandemic, these kinds of unnecessary and unwanted disruptions within the campus community and the spirit of fear within our education systems can be detrimental to the long-term health and viability of our students. Education played a key role in my life, and I know that it does in so many lives in this body and around this country. And it's important for us to protect that place, that sacred place of education in our country. In addition to the campus disruptions, these kinds of threats also draw down a significant amount of resources from our law enforcement agencies that are already struggling. Ranking Member Grassley talked about the challenges of meeting the demands, and I am thankful that President Biden spoke about the importance of providing our law enforcement agencies with more funding because the challenges that they face are extreme. It shouldn't be this way. Schools should not be a place of fear. They should be a place where dreams come true. Our nation has fought and fought and fought and continues to fight against dark elements within our society, and we will continue to do so. Last week, I was pleased to see the Senate unanimously pass bipartisan resolution condemning these evil threats of violence against HBCUs. We need the DOJ and the FBI to continue to provide oversight and to provide investigations. It's also sad to see that more than half of the hate crimes against people of a religious background happen to our Jewish members of this society. We can do better. We should do better. And it's one of the reasons why I supported and sponsored legislation around anti-Semitism on college campuses as well. I believe it is our responsibility as an American family to address the issues that challenge us, because a threat to one is indeed a threat to all.
Thank you, Senator Scott, for being here today. And I want to, before I recognize Congressman Steele, just acknowledge your accomplishment together with Senator Booker and Senator Warnock in passing the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill before the Senate last night on its way to the president, as you mentioned. I want to salute my colleague, Congressman Bobby Rush, who is the House sponsor of this measure and is retiring this year. It's fitting that he achieved this. We've tried for over a century to pass that legislation, over a century.
Yes.
And one of the seminal events, I think, that led to its passage was the tragedy of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old who went to a family vacation in Mississippi and was murdered. When his body was returned, his mutilated body returned to Chicago, his mother, Mamie Till Mosley, decided in a very courageous moment to have an open casket so everyone could see what happened to her boy. It changed America. I think the conversation on civil rights really took a different approach after that horrible, horrible event. The fact that this bill was named after that young boy, 14 years old, who died in Mississippi, is certainly, I think, one of the elements that brought it across the finish line finally. Congratulations to you. It was an historic achievement.
To the entire Congress. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Congresswoman Steele.
Thank you very much, Chairman Durbin. Ranking Member Grassley, thank you for having me with you this morning. It's vitally important that as representatives of American people, we are here in Congress address the continuing threat of hate and discrimination. I understand this issue very well, not only because my own constituents have been the subject of anti-Asian hate, but also because I myself have been called horrible racist slurs I've been told, such as, "We don't eat dogs like you do." As a proud American and somebody who loves this country dearly, I take this rise in hate crimes very seriously, and I'm pleased to join you today as a part of our joint efforts to tackle this issue. 1 year ago, I testified before the House Judiciary Committee about the troubling rise of hate crimes and discrimination, especially against members of Asian American Pacific Islanders communities. The situation has only gotten worse since then, and members of the AAPI community continue to suffer hate and discrimination in alarming rates. Reports of anti-Asian hate incidents increased 339% in the past year, which is especially shocking because the year before already had an increase of 124%. 70% of these incidents targeted women. Most of the time, these incidents happen in public spaces. Just like last year, California was at the top of the list of hate incidents per state. This problem is clearly out of control and it needs to stop immediately. Though incidents of hatred against the AAPI are on the rise, there are lots of reason to be optimistic. We can all agree that violence and hate are no place in the United States of America. While partisan divisions often seem to prevent us from doing our work, this is an area where we can and do find common ground. I have been proud to witness the ways in this Congress has acted to fight hatred against the AAPI communities. Last year, I introduced a resolution condemning hate crimes committed against members of the AAPI community. The Senate passed their own version of that very same resolution. The support for that resolution has been truly inspirational, and it shows that we can work together. We also came together as Democrats and Republicans to pass strong bipartisan legislation to combat hate crimes with the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which is the empowering federal law enforcement to attack this problem head on and put a stop to rise in hate crimes. While I'm proud of the important work we have done here in Washington, D.C. to address this problem, legislation is not enough to solve an issue that starts in hearts and minds. As a member of Congress, we also have a responsibility to take action on the local level to engage our communities and enlist their help in fighting this problem from further poisoning our country. Last May, I formed an AAPI advisory board back home in Orange County. I'm working with these local leaders to find ways that Congress can better serve this community and combat the rise in anti-AAPI hate. They are the ones on the ground facing this issue every day. Their experience and knowledge have been very valuable to me, and I believe that all members of Congress would benefit by engaging directly with the AAPI communities in their own districts. One of the best things we can do to stop this problem right now is empower people to stand up and speak out. I have hosted self-defense classes in my community, including one last week for seniors. Community events like these are very important for our Asian communities to help them protect themselves and stop Asian crime. Working together, I know that we can protect our neighbors and stop hate, not just in AAPI communities, but wherever it is. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to future opportunities to work together and end hate against our fellow Americans. With that, I yield back. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Congresswoman Steele, thank you very much for joining us today. We now will welcome the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the Honorable Kristen Clarke. She's a lifelong civil rights lawyer, spent her entire career in public service. At the Justice Department, she oversees federal civil rights enforcement and works to uphold the civil and constitutional rights of all Americans. She began her career as a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division. Before confirmation, she served as president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. So if you'll stand for one moment and raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. And the Assistant Attorney General is now recognized for a 5 minutes opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, my name is Kristen Clarke, and I serve as the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Justice Department's hate crimes enforcement and prevention work, and on our efforts to implement the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which includes the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. The Justice Department is focused on using every tool at its disposal to reduce violent crimes in our community. The Civil Rights Division plays a critical role in the department's efforts, including by aggressively prosecuting violent hate crimes across the country. Hate crimes are unique. Acts of hate not only harm the direct victims, but they also reverberate to instill fear across entire communities. And unfortunately, hate crimes are on the rise. This is one of the reasons why Attorney General Merrick Garland's very first directive called for an internal review to determine how the Justice Department can deploy all the tools at its disposal to counter the rise in hate. During that review, Congress passed an important piece of anti-hate legislation, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which included the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. And I want to thank Chair Durbin, Senator Blumenthal, and Senator Hirono for your efforts to make this critical statute a reality. FBI statistics confirm that in 2020, reported hate crimes rose to their highest levels in nearly 2 decades. And the majority of these crimes, over 60%, were motivated by race and ethnicity. And of those crimes, more than half of them targeted Black people. We also saw a shocking rise of over 70% in hate crimes targeting people of Asian descent, the highest in over a decade. We saw a sharp rise of over 30% in hate crimes motivated by gender identity of the victim. And we've seen acts of hate targeting houses of worship in religious communities, including the recent and terrifying hostage-taking targeting the Jewish community at a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. Last May, the Attorney General issued a memorandum that strengthens the Justice Department's efforts to address unlawful acts of hate. from incident reporting to stronger law enforcement training and coordination, to community outreach and designation of a department-wide hate crimes coordinator, the department has been fully activated in the fight against hate. Under that memorandum and the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, the Civil Rights Division is expediting its review of federal hate crimes. Since January of 2021, we have charged more than 30 defendants with federal hate crimes. We've also secured convictions and sentences in more than 20 hate crimes cases. This work makes clear that even though hate crimes continue to pose a real and present threat to communities across the country, the Justice Department will hold perpetrators of these heinous acts accountable. We know that racially motivated violence is a persistent problem. Just a few weeks ago, we secured hate crimes and attempted kidnapping convictions against the 3 men who tragically murdered Ahmaud Arbery. Mr. Arbery was targeted because of his race by 3 white men while jogging in a Georgia neighborhood. Georgia did not have a hate crime statute when Mr. Arbery was killed. The department stepped in to fill the gap. The evidence at trial revealed the defendant harbored racist beliefs that led them to make assumptions and decisions about Mr. Arbery because he was Black. For example, the evidence showed that one defendant had referred to his daughter's Black boyfriend as a monkey and used the N-word. A second made deeply racist comments to people he barely knew, and he indicated he believed that, quote, Blacks are nothing but trouble. And the third associated Black people with criminality and wanted to see them killed or harmed. In February, a Texas man pleaded guilty to hate crimes charges for attacking an Asian family at a store in Midland, Texas. The defendant saw the family, followed them, and violently attacked the father and his 2 young children with a knife. The defendant admitted he targeted the family because he believed they were Chinese and deemed them responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. We've also investigated and prosecuted cases involving hate based on gender identity, and sexual orientation. Last July, for example, the department charged an Ohio man who self-identified as an incel, or involuntary celibate, with allegedly attempting to conduct a mass shooting of women at a university and illegally possessing a machine gun. He allegedly wrote a manifesto stating that he would, quote, slaughter women, and a note saying that he hoped to, quote, aim big, end quote, for a kill count of 3,000 people. And in June and November of last year, we prosecuted cases in Texas and Oregon involving defendants who used the social media app Grindr to target, lure, and assault gay men because of their sexual orientation. We've also prosecuted numerous defendants for hate crimes based on religion. Last December, a man was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years after he opened fire at a synagogue in Poway, California, killing 1, injuring 3, and endangering more than 50 others. This same man had attempted to set fire to the nearby Dar al-Arqam Mosque the month before. And he'd written a manifesto in which he made many anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim statements, including expressing a desire to kill Jewish people. The Civil Rights Division is also fighting back against unlawful acts of hate that violate the federal civil rights statutes that we secure. For example, we secured a settlement with a school district in Utah that had failed for years to address serious and widespread racial harassment of Black and Asian American students. Our investigation uncovered numerous reports of harassment, including hundreds of documented uses of the N-word and physical assaults. All students deserve safe learning environments. Unfortunately, non-reporting and under-reporting of hate crimes is a long-standing problem, and we know that accurate data is critical to identifying and preventing hate crimes. Consistent with the mandates of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, the department is taking steps to improve reporting, including by developing guidance and, when funding is appropriated, launching new grant programs. Acts of unlawful hate come in many forms, from online harassment and verbal threats to physical assaults, cross-burnings, attacks on houses of worship, vandalizing places of business, and mass murder. But these acts have one thing in common. They terrorize not only individuals and families, but entire communities because of their race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Congress's attention to this issue made critical statutes like the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act and the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act a reality. The Department of Justice remains deeply committed to standing up to bias-motivated violence and to promoting the principles that strengthen our democracy and protect all of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, General Clarke. General Clarke, when President Grant created the Justice Department in 1870, their first mission was to secure the civil rights promised by the Reconstruction-era amendments. And the first actions included the prosecution of Ku Klux Klan members who terrorized Black Americans. That scourge of white supremacist terror persists to this day in our country. Our law enforcement intelligence agencies have repeatedly warned that violent white supremacists pose the most lethal domestic terror threat. The threat is growing. Last year, FBI Director Wray told our committee that during his tenure at the FBI, the number of investigations and arrests of white supremacists has grown significantly. So I need to ask you two questions. We want more and better reporting of the incidents of hate in America. There are more than 70 cities in our country with populations over 100,000 who either did not report any hate crimes to the FBI or affirmatively reported they had no hate crimes during the reporting period recently. Even more troubling, 2020 was the third year in a row with a decline in law enforcement agencies submitting hate crime data to the FBI. We know the FBI data is deeply flawed because the Justice Department's Bureau of Statistics has reported that there are on average 250,000 hate crimes annually in the United States. Last year, as you mentioned, we passed the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, designed to provide more resources to law enforcement to improve data collection and reporting. So two questions. Is it getting better? Can we expect any results to show that we paid attention to the new law and we have better reporting from state and local law enforcement? And secondly, what actions are being taken against white supremacist groups?
Thank you for that question, Chair Durbin. Working to ensure that our local and state law enforcement agencies are doing a better job capturing data is one of our top priorities at the Justice Department. We are working to provide guidance and working to shine a light on this issue. We know that accurate data is critical to ensuring that we are deploying resources to the right places, critical to identifying hotspots, critical to preventing violent hate crimes from happening. So this is one of our top priorities. In terms of our current present-day efforts to counter white supremacy, this is also a top priority for us in the Civil Rights Division. You noted the history that led to the founding of the Justice Department, and Attorney General Merrick Garland speaks to that history often. And sadly, too many of the events that we see unfolding in our communities across the country today remind us that while we have made progress, racially motivated hate it remains a stark problem in our nation today. The Justice Department's recent conviction secured against the 3 men who killed Ahmaud Arbery stands as a powerful reminder of that. Another powerful example of this concerns a defendant who was recently sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for a murder. He targeted 2 Blacks and an attempted murder on a 3rd African-American at a Kroger store in Kentucky. He followed the Black man who was shopping with his grandson, shot him in the back of the head, then shot him several times in the torso, then shot a Black woman in the parking lot and attempted to attack a 3rd. Sadly, at every turn, we knew that racially motivated hate violence is alive and well, and the Civil Rights Division is committed to using the tools that Congress gave us to stand up to the threat.
There's an inscription on a building downtown, not far from here, that says those who don't learn history are condemned to repeat it. How would you characterize our responsibility to tell America in general and the newest Americans exactly what the honest, complete history of race relations has been in the United States?
Critically important, Chair Durbin. America's history is one where we've seen great progress, and we continue to work to make real the promises underlying the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But sadly, we know that racial discrimination, racial harassment, racially motivated violence continue to be problems that threaten the safety of people living in their communities, threaten our children who are learning in school environments, pose threats to workers in the workplace. So it's important that we understand our history and that we continue to focus today on these long-standing problems that have loomed heavy throughout our nation's history.
Thank you, General Clarke. Senator Grassley.
Welcome, General. General Clarke, you're sitting alone here today, but you shouldn't be. The FBI declined to appear for this hearing, and I believe they put you forward to answer questions for them. I've heard some concerns about the FBI's response to hate crimes. I've heard they've been uncoordinated and that the FBI hasn't always kept in touch with the communities that have been targeted. What can the FBI and the department be doing better to communicate with and assist the communities that are being targeted for attacks and threats?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. While I cannot speak for the FBI, I can speak for the coordination between the Civil Rights Division and the FBI. We know that they have elevated hate crimes to one of their highest threat band levels. We've worked with them to carry out training for law enforcement across the country to ensure that they are instituting best practices when it comes to standing up to hate. I know that with respect to the most recent tragedy in Colleyville, Texas, that the rabbi at the synagogue that was targeted credits the active shooter training that was provided and supported by the FBI. So while I can't speak for Director Wray, I do know that standing up to hate crimes is an important priority for the agency.
Should the FBI have more coordinated national leadership when there's a string of related crimes like these dozens of threats that have appeared at historical Black colleges and universities?
Ranking Member Grassley, I can't speak for the FBI, but what I can tell you is that in the dozens of recent hate crime prosecutions that we've brought over the past year, we could not have done this work without the expertise and resources that the FBI brings to bear in investigating these cases, developing these cases, and the aid that they bring to our prosecutions is critical.
The FBI didn't immediately understand the anti-Semitic nature of the attack at Colleyville, even though it was an attack on Jewish congregants. Apparently, the FBI thought that because the attacker was motivated by a jihadist, international terrorist ideology, he couldn't also be anti-Semite. Is it correct that many international terrorism movements have an anti-Semitic ideology? And if so, shouldn't the FBI agents who work international terrorism cases be trained to recognize this as domestic terrorism investigators are?
Ranking Member Grassley, I believe that you are referring to a preliminary statement that was made on the ground by an agent in the heat of the moment on the heels of that tragic hostage taking. The FBI has been unequivocal in declaring this an act of anti-Semitism, in declaring this an attack on Jewish people who were targeted because of their faith. And we know at the department that anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States today. And the FBI stands as a partner to us in the Civil Rights Division in our work to hold perpetrators accountable when they target Jewish people because of their faith.
When the FBI works terrorism investigations, they often do so in a very proactive way. They try to discover those who are planning violence and interdict those people. This is often done with sting where government agents pose as co-conspirators. However, criminal civil rights investigations tend to be more reactive. There have been efforts to change this. In the case of a person who intended to bomb a synagogue in Colorado, counterterrorism and civil rights authorities worked together to catch him in a sting before he could put his plans into effect. In fact, as a staffer of mine and a staffer for Senator Durbin's worked together on that investigation while they were both at the Department of Justice. My question, how can the Department of Justice bring a more proactive approach to hate crime investigations?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. We have been very focused on trying to get ahead of hate crimes. One of the things that we've done is we've not turned our back or ignored hate incidents. These are incidents that may not run afoul of our criminal statutes, but may run afoul of our civil statutes, and if ignored, could escalate into something more violent. I'll give you one example out of the state of Utah involving the Davis School District, where students were subject to harassment. There were hundreds of documented incidents of racial slurs and violent acts targeting young people, and we worked with the school district to put in place a comprehensive set of reforms that will help to ensure a safer learning environment for those students. But working to address non-criminal hate incidents that may run afoul of our federal civil rights statutes is one of the ways that we're trying to be proactive and get ahead of issues before they escalate into something more dangerous and violent down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, for this important hearing, and thank you, Assistant Attorney General Clarke. It's great to see you again, and I'm so grateful for your decades of commitment to this important and critical challenge facing our nation. It is as old as our nation, and deploying the resources and the capabilities of the Department of Justice to better analyze and understand hate crimes that continue to be committed across our country against Americans based on their race, their ethnicity, their orientation, their religion, is a critical part of being the Department of Justice. There was a panel before you, and I just will briefly thank Senator Tim Scott, my co-chair of the HBCU caucus, for his partnership with me in a resolution that passed the Senate unanimously, and I hope will be adopted by the House later today. And while I do think we need to focus on where we're moving forward, 2 centuries of underfunding in the resources for HBCUs has also left them under-resourced to deal with some of the physical infrastructure challenges that this wave of threats also lays bare. And so I'm working with Senator Scott on the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act to invest further in security and in institutional infrastructure. Attorney General Clarke, Assistant Attorney General Clarke, what I'm talking about is an alarming pattern of threats on HBCU campuses, including Delaware State University, my own state. Could you just tell us briefly how DOJ is communicating with campus leaders to ensure they understand how to take appropriate action to secure and support their campus communities?
Thank you, Senator Coons. It is my understanding that the FBI's counterterrorism unit is handling the investigation into this matter. While I can't speak for the FBI's work, I do understand that more than half of the field agencies across the country have been activated to focus on these threats. I also understand that they have conducted outreach to security points of contacts at HBCUs and other critical stakeholders.
I think there's reason to put a particular focus on this wave of threats because of the impact it has on campuses that have already had a long struggle due to COVID and are overcoming historic challenges, and it sort of freezes in place a campus that is meant to be a door to opportunity and is a door through which so many in Delaware and in other parts of our country have walked in the past. I've long been an advocate for the nonprofit security grant program, which provides assistance to houses of worship to help bolster their security. On the next panel, we'll hear from a rabbi who has recently experienced just the latest in a whole series of attacks on houses of worship. How does the Department of Justice work with Homeland Security to help houses of worship protect themselves? And what more do you think we could do in terms of authorities or resources from Congress that might strengthen that work and work with HBCUs?
Thank you, Senator. We work very closely with the FBI and our other federal law enforcement partners to stand up to the very real threats that we know we see at houses of worship across our country. Just to give you an example of some of the work that we've done very recently, just 2 weeks ago, we secured a 7-year sentence against a man who targeted 3 churches in the Nashville area, 2 Baptist churches, 1 Catholic church, and 1 Methodist church. The defendant carried out arsons targeting these houses of worship. In Minnesota, the Dar al-Farouk Mosque was targeted. We secured a 53-year sentence against a defendant who established a terrorist militia group called the White Rabbits in Illinois, recruited co-defendants to join the militia, which outfitted them with paramilitary equipment and rifles. They then drove rented pickup trucks to Bloomington, Minnesota, to carry out a bombing of the mosque. They deployed a 20-pound black powder pipe bomb, which exploded, causing extreme damage. There were worshipers who were gathered inside. The defendant targeted this mosque to terrorize Muslims into believing that they are not welcome in the U.S. So these are just some of the examples of the work that we are doing to hold perpetrators accountable when they target houses of worship, regardless of their denomination. We believe that all people, regardless of their faith, should be free to practice their religion in our country.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that horrifying specific incident and for so much hard work by you, by your colleagues at the Department of Justice. I hope we can work together to strengthen your partnerships with state and local law enforcement. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus, both to improve the quality of the data being collected, as the chairman mentioned in his opening comments, and to improve the security of Americans who should be free to work, to live, to worship, to pursue their own dreams in this country without the sort of hateful harassment and sometimes literal attacks that are the focus of this hearing today. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coons. Senator Cornyn.
Ms. Clarke, you're no doubt aware that the vast majority of Americans today feel like crime is a serious problem, violent crime, and large supermajorities say that they think the problem is just getting worse. I know this committee has had a hearing on carjacking and today on hate crimes. But is there any reason to consider that crimes that are motivated by race or ethnicity are more or less serious than crimes committed for other reasons?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Cornyn. As you know, violent crime is on the rise, and no doubt hate crimes are an important part of that equation. Many of the hate crimes that we are seeing across the country result in loss of life, result in assaults carried out on innocent individuals. For Attorney General Merrick Garland, standing up to violent crime in the United States is a top priority. He has activated the FBI and U.S. attorneys' offices to institute anti-violent crime plans. And in the Civil Rights Division, our part in this fight is standing up to hate crimes using the statutes that Congress gave us.
Well, there's no doubt that crimes targeting people based on their race or ethnicity are despicable. But I'm asking you, should we be any less vigilant on investigating and prosecuting other crimes that are not based on ethnicity and race?
No, all crime is abhorrent, and we need federal, state, and local law enforcement working to stand up to crimes wherever they are carried out against innocent lives.
Do you agree that the defund the police movement has been a bust?
I do not support defunding the police. I know that the Justice Department does not support defunding the police. We work every day to make
You're
sure.
familiar with the fact that there were people across the country advocating defunding the police. As a matter of fact, and you were questioned about this during your confirmation hearing, you wrote a op-ed piece in 2020, the title of which is said, "I prosecuted police killings, defund the police, but be strategic." And you advocated for less funding for the police and more in social workers, less funding for police, more in social support for our schools, less funding for police, and more in mental health aid. And the sentence that sort of sticks out to me in this, where you list some examples, you said, "These examples demonstrate that we can be smart and strategic about how and where we look to defund the police." Do you regret your op-ed and support for cutting funding for police? And do you agree with me that this statement, really political statement about the police and cutting support for them, has contributed to the rise of violent crime in America?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I do not support defunding the police. I believe that our law enforcement faces lots of challenges today. You mentioned mental health. That is one example.
You support cutting funding for the police?
No, I do not.
Notwithstanding, you said we should invest less in police for 3 reasons in your article. You don't consider that a reduction in funding or cutting funding for the police?
Well, Senator, I'm representing the Justice Department today, and we are dispensing hundreds of millions in support and grants to support our local and state law enforcement across the country. I know that we need law enforcement equipped with the resources necessary to stand up to violent crime, to hate crime, and other kinds of crimes that are carried out across the country.
Are you familiar with a recent federal district court case in Northern Virginia where the trial judge ruled unconstitutional a racial balancing formula for admission to the school that resulted in a reduction of Asian American students being admitted? Are you familiar with that case?
I'm not familiar with that case, Senator.
And do you believe that targeting Asian Americans for reduced participation in our society or in public education is a goal that the U.S. government should pursue?
I believe that we need to stand up for all communities, and anti-Asian hate, for example, is a very real problem in our country, and we're committed to standing up to that.
And in the Supreme Court, as you know, there are a couple of cases pending concerning race-based admission standards negatively affecting Asian Americans. Has the Justice Department under President Biden argued that those lawsuits ought to be dropped so that the Supreme Court does not render a judgment?
Senator, I have not worked on those cases that are currently at the Supreme Court.
You're the head of the Civil Rights Division, I believe, correct?
Yes, I am.
You're familiar with the cases?
I am familiar with the cases.
You don't know whether the Justice Department has argued that those cases should be dropped so the Supreme Court does not make a decision?
Well, I believe that the senator is referencing a case involving Harvard University and the University of North Carolina.
That's correct.
Those matters are being handled by our Solicitor General, so I would direct the senator's attention to the briefs that the Justice Department.
I'm asking you.
I have not worked on those cases during my time at the Justice Department.
Do you support policies that diminish the opportunity of Asian Americans to participate in higher education?
I fully support full enforcement of our civil rights laws to ensure protection of all communities across our country, including the Asian American community.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me thank you for your good work, Ms. Clarke, and sort of take off from where Senator Cornyn was. Last fall, vandals painted anti-immigrant white supremacist messages on the Hmong Cultural Center and a Hmong grocery store in the Frogtown neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota. The attack came less than a month after Minnesota's Suni Lee became the first Hmong athlete to win an Olympic gold medal. We know there's a larger trend. In 2020, anti-Asian hate crimes rose more than 70% nationwide. I've been a big fan of what Senator Hirono has done. I'm sure she'll ask you about this, as well as the Justice Department's focus. Could you tell me the work that you've done on anti-Asian hate crimes?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for the question. Standing up to anti-Asian hate is one of our top priorities in the Civil Rights Division. I referenced earlier a recent February 2022 guilty plea that we secured against a defendant who was charged with 3 counts of federal hate crimes for targeting an Asian American family at a Sam's Club in Midland, Texas. He believed that this family was from the country responsible for the COVID pandemic. He believed they were Chinese and deemed them responsible for the pandemic. He obtained a knife in the store. He attacked a father. He slashed a 6-year-old child and pursued a 2-year-old and yelled that they should, quote, get out of America. This is just one among a number of ways that we are standing up to the problem of anti-Asian hate in the country.
Thank you. I want to turn to another case where the Department of Justice dedicated FBI agents and prosecutors, and this was actually back before your time, but it was an incredible work in identifying those that bombed the Dar el-Farouk. You brought this up in your comment center in Bloomington, Minnesota in 2017. The person who orchestrated the bombing was sentenced to 53 years in prison. We also had 2 Jewish community centers that were targeted. It was a point of pride for us that when the people came back after wandering around in the cold to the Jewish Community Center, the first call that had been left for them was from the Islamic Center asking them if they needed a place to gather. So we worked really hard on these issues in our state, between especially our Somali population, our Jewish population. Could you talk about how the FBI has reallocated resources in order to investigate and prosecute crimes at religious centers?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Well, I can't speak for the FBI. I can speak to how we coordinate with them inside the Civil Rights Division. I know that they have raised hate crimes to one of their highest threat band level. I know that they are engaged in outreach to stakeholders across the country. I have worked with the FBI on trainings that they are conducting for law enforcement to ensure that they are instituting best practices when it comes to standing up to hate. We have partnered with them in outreach events to impacted community groups to talk about the way that the Justice Department and FBI are prioritizing the fight against hate. So while I can't speak for them, I know that through our coordination efforts, it is very clear that this is a top priority for the agency.
Thank you. I know Senator Coons asked about the HBCUs and the threats, the bomb threats. At the same time, actually, one of our most well-known African-American churches, the Pilgrim Baptist Church, historically black church in St. Paul, they received a bomb threat. I talked to their pastor. It was a very frightening experience for them. And one of the things to step back and look at this, and I know that put resources into this, is the need to have U.S. attorneys in place. I raised this at a hearing last week. I'm going to continue raising it. I particularly thank Senator Durbin for his raising this, but we have a number of U.S. attorneys on hold, as you're aware, from one senator. And I just want to make clear, I think you know the situation in our state. We have 2 well-loved police chiefs, both who retired. There's a search going on, Minneapolis and St. Paul, so we only have acting chiefs. We have a retiring DA in Hennepin County, and we have no U.S. attorney in place. And in fact, the last acting went to the Justice Department, who came in actually during the Trump administration, and is a very good person, but he's now in Washington. So that's our situation. My nominee is excellent. I know you know that. He was the U.S. attorney before. He was an assistant U.S. attorney. He has respect from almost everyone in our state. And I just wondered if you could close by commenting about how necessary it is to have U.S. attorneys in place as we combat any kind of crime, not just hate crime.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We could not do our work. We could not stand up to the threat of hate crimes without the support of our U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. These regional offices are on the front lines. They bring critical resources to bear in this fight. The recent prosecution of the 3 men tied to the death of Ahmaud Arbery is one recent example of this. We could not do our work without their support, without their frontline support.
Exactly, and it was just, in fact, that recently had successful prosecutions in the George Floyd case. They have done their work. We have mounting carjackings and other things. They need a leader in place. They want a leader in place. So this is a call to my colleagues, but I have never held any judiciary person up at any, no matter who is president. And I'm just asking for respect here so we can get some in place. When the governor is calling me about this, when Republican congressmen are calling me about this to get him in place and asking if they can help, I think we've got an issue.
Senator Klobuchar, while you were traveling with the president last week to your home state, we raised this issue again on the floor of the Senate. We have U.S. attorneys as well as U.S. marshals who are being held up by one senator. It is, I guess, appropriate to ask witnesses about defunding the police. This is a parallel move. This is actually removing or failing to appoint law enforcement officials who are critical to safety in our communities. And I believe it's an unwise approach, and I'll continue to argue that. I believe that Senator Lee is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Clarke, for being here. In 1994, in a case called Johnson versus Miller, the voting rights section was sanctioned almost $600,000 for collusive misconduct. The district court noted that the ACLU was, quote, in constant contact with the DOJ line attorneys and declared it's obvious from a review of the materials that the ACLU attorney's relationship with the DOJ voting section was informal and familiar. The dynamics were that of peers working together, not of an advocate submitting proposals to a higher authority. The court further noted, quote, the considerable influence of the ACLU advocacy group on voting rights decisions of the United States Attorney General is an embarrassment, and it's surprising that the Department of Justice was so blind to this impropriety, especially in a role as sensitive as that of preserving the fundamental right to vote. I wish I could say that this type of collusive behavior came to an abrupt halt with the Johnson decision. It should have, but it didn't. In 2010, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights called out the voting rights section for, quote, inappropriately selective enforcement of the laws, harassment of dissenting employees, and alliances with outside interest groups at odds with the rule of law. Additionally, just in recent months, this committee has heard testimony from former voting section attorneys describing a long history of collusive behavior. The whole reason I bring this up, Ms. Clarke, is to demonstrate that there is a troubling pattern of behavior that's been exhibited by the voting section in the past. And so, you know, when something like that happens, it's one of many instances where the Freedom of Information Act is necessary, and it's certainly an example of why it exists. It exists, among other things, to ensure that this kind of reprehensible behavior isn't occurring, and that when it does occur, people can find out about it. So can I just ask you, is it appropriate for attorneys at the Department of Justice to collude or conspire with outside interest groups when deciding to bring cases against individuals, organizations, or states?
Thank you, Senator. Collusion and conspiring certainly sounds inappropriate. What I can assure you, Senator, is that we carry out our work in the department, in the Civil Rights Division, independently and with a focus on the facts and applying the law to the facts.
I appreciate that, and I think that's the kind of thing that all Americans should be able to expect from the department, and where that's the case, it'll be borne out. It's one of the reasons why it's concerning to me. It's come to my attention that at the end of August of last year, the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia submitted a FOIA request, quote, seeking communication discussing Georgia's new election law or the Biden administration's lawsuit against the law between 62 identified outside individuals, entities, members of Congress, and their staffs. Despite federal law requiring that the Department of Justice respond to FOIA requests within 20 business days, absent unusual circumstances that, to my knowledge, haven't been invoked here, it appears that Georgia has yet to receive any of the requested information. Ms. Clarke, has the Department of Justice released any of the requested information to the Georgia Secretary of State?
Thank you, Senator. We don't handle the Freedom of Information Act requests that get directed to the department. I'm happy to take the question back and direct it to the appropriate officials.
That'd be great. I'd appreciate that. And if you could take that up with them, that'd be wonderful. So in the interest of transparency, are you committing to me that you'll make sure that this FOIA request is granted and that the appropriate documents are submitted to the Georgia Secretary of State?
No, we don't handle those requests in the Civil Rights Division, so I can't speak for the officials that process them.
But it is your division, and I hope and expect that you will want those requests handled appropriately.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the Georgia Secretary of State's FOIA request is not the only one that's gone unanswered. We're aware of numerous FOIA requests submitted, for example, by the American Accountability Foundation relating to the Biden executive order requiring federal agencies to develop voter registration plans. Those requests were filed in October, and they still haven't been answered. Will you commit to making sure that those requests are answered as soon as possible?
I can't speak for the component within the department that handles FOIA requests, but I'm happy to take the question back, Senator.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. The Freedom of Information Act is a tool. It's a tool that helps keep our agencies honest. And if this kind of behavior continues, the blatant disregard for requests for public information, we're going to have to ask ourselves what exactly is happening within the voting session that's being hidden and that people in the section are trying to hide. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your very important and positive work in your position now and throughout your career on hate crimes and many other civil rights issues before our nation. These issues are only increasing in importance, and I think your testimony today reaffirms that we can do even more to improve the law that we passed just recently, and I want to join in commending my partner in that effort, Senator Hirono, as well as the Civil Rights Division for all that you did. We are hopefully on the verge of approving an omnibus budget bill that will provide the funding we anticipated for implementing that measure. And that funding would go in part to police departments, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And I might just emphasize, rather than defunding the police, in fact, the Civil Rights Division and all of us who advocated for this measure want more funding to go to police, more support financially for them, and not only in hate crimes, but in counseling where police have the really deeply challenging job of intervening in domestic disputes or other kinds of confrontations where they be at risk, as well as the public. More funding, more support, more resources is what we want. And hate crimes is a good example where they will be recipients of money that we have included in the hate crimes we passed. And along with community organizations and states, hopefully mount efforts to educate, to investigate, and prosecute. So my question is, will you be ready to begin taking grants, applications from police departments and others who may seek this funding as soon as we're able to approve it?
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Yes, the department has already started to distribute grants in calendar year 2021 and is looking forward to Congress appropriating funds in fiscal year 2022. The department has already begun the work and is ready to institute those grants and is simply waiting for the allocation of funds to move forward with that important work.
Do you agree that there's really no state or community, for that matter, that is immune from hate crimes, and that police departments and community organizations around the country would do well to consider applying for these grants.
Yes, absolutely. We see hate crimes in every corner of our country, urban and rural areas. We see them targeting people who are Jewish and Muslim. We see hate crimes targeting people who are Black, Latino, Asian American. In every corner of our country, we know that hate is pervasive, and we want to ensure that our law enforcement agencies that are on the front lines of this work have the resources and tools needed to stand up to the problem. There is an appendix attached to my testimony that talks about some of the grant-making work carried out by our Office of Justice Programs. This is a critical part of the department's approach to fighting hate.
And I hope that you'll be receiving and maybe making grants to some applications coming from Connecticut, because every state, every community has a stake in this issue. And I hope that we can work together on further improvements in the law. One of the suggestions, just to give an example, is that there are some kinds of threats that perhaps should be prosecutable. There are very strong First Amendment interests at play and deeply involved that we want to avoid infringing on. But have you thought about the potential for threats as a target of prosecution?
Thank you, Senator. We have identified this as an area where we could do more if we had the tools that Congress gives us to do so. And we look forward to working with this committee to studying that issue further and helping you all identifying a path forward.
Because the present law, 18 United States Code 249, I think it is, talks about willful bodily injury, but not threats. It talks about potentially attempts, but the idea that some kinds of fighting words, to use the Supreme Court analysis, or similar kinds of direct bodily harm, imminently and directly threatened, could aid in your preventing and deterring these kinds of hate crimes. So I thank you. I don't know whether you have any more comments on that.
I don't, except that the department and our Office of Legislative Affairs would welcome the opportunity to help Congress study this issue further and to help this committee study that issue further.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me to make a unanimous consent request to make a document part of the record?
Of course.
Thank you very much. I'd ask unanimous consent to make part of the record the brief for the United States as amicus curiae in Students for Fair Admissions versus President and Fellows of Harvard College, which reflects that Ms. Clarke is one of the attorneys of record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Clarke, thank you very much for your time today. I want to talk with you about the HBCU threats that have happened, because this has caused disruption, class cancellations, fear. It's of tremendous concern to us in Tennessee. Fisk University in Nashville is one of those that has unfortunately experienced these threats. So has FBI or DOJ made any arrest in these cases, these threats? Are you closer to knowing who the perpetrator is? Is there any action specific toward Fisk? If you could give us a little bit of a background there.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. These investigations are being handled by the FBI's Counterterrorism Unit. I can't speak for that unit and where they are in the investigation, but I do know that they have activated more than half of the field offices across the country to look into and to investigate this matter.
So this is not coming through your department?
Not through the Civil Rights Division, Senator.
Okay. So then the Congregation of Israel attack that took place, and I know that we are going to have the Rabbi with us in the next panel. I was really interested to see that he mentioned the training scenarios that were conducted with local law enforcement as helping to save lives that day. So what resources, as we're all concerned about attacks against religious organizations and houses of worship, what resources are available for that training? How are you all working in this regard?
Thank you, Senator. So a few things. The FBI is supporting some of these active shooter trainings for our houses of worship across the country. We're also engaged in public outreach and public education to facilitate our efforts to stand up to hate. And we're doing a lot to safeguard our houses of worship. We recently prosecuted a defendant in February, just last month, who carried out arsons at 4 churches in the Nashville area in your state, Senator, targeting 2 Baptist churches, 1 Catholic church, 1 Methodist church. So it is the combination of criminal prosecutions, our civil rights enforcement work, public outreach, education, partnering with the FBI. All of this informs a kind of comprehensive approach to our work to stand up to hate.
So is DOJ monitoring any of the groups or the bad actors that are pushing the anti-Semitic or jihadist violence?
That work would be carried out, those investigations would be carried out by the FBI. I can't speak for their pending investigations, but standing up to perpetrators of hate violence in our country is a top priority for us.
Okay. Let me ask you about the Asian American crimes that we've seen. These have primarily been in the large cities. Many of them are carried out against elderly and women. And it seems that some of these Asian American the crimes against Asian Americans, have been conducted by people with long criminal histories. They are indeed repeat offenders. So does DOJ or the FBI have any indication why career criminals in particular are suddenly targeting Asian Americans?
No doubt, Senator, we've seen a 70% rise in anti-Asian hate. The FBI data makes this clear. We deem it really important to look at early warning signs. Really critical to not ignore hate incidents because that may provide an opportunity to get ahead of a matter before it escalates to a violent hate crime. Outreach, education are also tools that we're using to confront this
But
threat.
there's no active program looking at why many of these offenders have long criminal records and they are out on the streets and they're carrying out these crimes.
Well, I do know that some of the other components within the Justice Department, such as the Office of Justice Programs, are focused on these kinds of issues. So we would direct the committee's attention to their work, thinking about kind of the criminal histories of the defendants that we prosecute is not a core component of our work in the Civil Rights Division, but I agree with you, Senator. It's an issue that warrants closer attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for letting me go ahead of you. Appreciate that very much. General Clarke, thank you very much for being here and for providing all of the statistical information that's an addendum to your testimony. I appreciate all of that updated information, and I thank the Department of Justice for making hate crime prevention and prosecution a top priority. As you note in your testimony, though, the hate crimes, much less hate incidents, are vastly underrepresented, and it is astounding to know that more than 12,000 law enforcement agencies reported 0 hate crimes. I think that is totally unbelievable. The vast majority of these agencies, well over 80% of the are what can I say? So the underreporting is something that I know you are addressing through, for example, the grants that Senator Blumenthal ask you about, is there a way to incentivize through your grants of the agencies to pay attention to the underreporting of hate crimes and to do something about it, such as giving these agencies an advantage when applying for grant funding if they make the reporting, at least, of hate crimes a priority?
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Working with local and state law enforcement to make improvements in capturing and collecting data is an important priority for the department. And it's through grant making, it's through outreach, training, the issuance of guidance. The department is instituting a multifaceted strategy to help improve data collection.
So you are using the grant-making process as one of the ways that you're going to encourage these agencies to pay attention.
That is
The need
one.
for-
That is one of the methods, Senator.
Good. I'm glad you noted that they used the word hate incidents during parts of your responses. And there is a specific reason why I personally insisted that the COVID-19 hate crimes legislation included not just the crimes, but the incidents. So much less of, that it's hard enough, I should say, that we are facing the total underreporting of hate crimes, but you can imagine that incidents are basically very, very underreported. And so we know that these kinds of incidents, for example, harassing someone who is at a Starbucks, telling her to go back where she came from, where the manager and the other people there do absolutely nothing. That we know these incidents are occurring by the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So it occurs to me, as I brought out the last time you were before us, the bystander training issue. Is that an appropriate area of focus for the Department of Justice to enable companies, for example, to provide bystander training, not to endanger their own safety, but to sometimes as simple as simply intervening in whatever is occurring? For example, the young lady I talked about at Starbucks, if someone were to just go to her and say, well, can you come and sit with me, or just something like that. So I am wondering whether the numbers of incidents that are occurring in this area is an area where the DOJ could provide some further guidance, especially to companies.
I agree, Senator. This is an area that requires more focus, empowering bystanders to not stand silent as people are victimizing, when and where appropriate, can be a powerful form of intervention. I think this is particularly true when you think about young people, for example. We want to ensure that all young people are in safe learning environments. And empowering a peer to stand up to protect a victim who might, a peer who might be victimized, could be an important and powerful intervention.
So has the DOJ developed some kind of a program or an awareness area with regard to hate incidents?
Thank you, Senator. I don't know the answer to that question. There is an appendix attached to my testimony that talks about some of the grant making and outreach work carried out by our Office of Justice Programs. We also have the Community Relations Service. They are the department's peacekeepers and work to get on the ground in communities where hate incidents may be unfolding, get on the ground where there may be tensions that are arising. And so some of the sister components within the department may very well be engaged in this important work.
Can you provide us more information as to those kinds of efforts? Because I think the massive number of incidents that are going on in our country need to be addressed in some sort of a systemic way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, happy to take the question back, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Rono. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Ms. Clarke. I'm delighted to see you here. Thank you so much for your work. Hate crimes have now spiked to the point where they are, as you describe, a top national threat priority. This is probably an easy answer for you, but just so it's clear on the record, why is it important that a crime be charged as a hate crime rather than just a crime?
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Hate crimes not only target particular individuals, but they send a message to entire communities that they are not wanted. So it's important that we stand up to hate crimes because of the reverberating effects that they have across communities.
And I noticed in your testimony that in most of the cases you referred to, the individual who committed the violent crime was the individual who was charged with a hate crime. You also mentioned a New Jersey case in which there was a conspiracy charged involving an organization that I guess the crime itself was the repeated vandalization of properties. How often are you able to go beyond the actual individual at the point of violence in a hate crime and look at the organization that the individual may have been a member of, say, a white supremacist militia group, or an entity or an individual who might have participated so actively in spinning that person up into the state of mind that made them become violent, that they have criminal culpability. So beyond the actual individual at the scene of the crime, are you able to use conspiracy, aiding and abetting, other theories of liability to expand beyond just the individual? And do you need more help? Should you be doing that? And do you need more help to do that if you feel you should be doing that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So we prosecute individuals and not groups. And there are cases where we are able to prosecute a set of co-defendants where the facts lead us to understand that there are a number of people who work together to carry out a heinous hate crime. One example involves the Dar al-Farouk mosque bombing in Minnesota. That involved a defendant who recruited a set of co-defendants.
Who were co-conspirators, in effect.
Who worked together to carry out the bombing.
So I was referring back to your testimony that in November 2021, a New Jersey man was sentenced for conspiring with white supremacists to threaten and intimidate African Americans and Jewish Americans by vandalizing properties throughout the country. So that appears to have been charged as a conspiracy case. Is that true?
I believe that's the case, Senator, and the department would welcome the opportunity to work with the committee to understand what additional tools we might be able to use in our arsenal to fully confront the range of, hate crime threats and offenses and conspiracies that we face in the country today.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because if you're looking at an explanation of why we're seeing a spike in hate crimes, why this has had to be raised to a top national threat level by your department. I don't think it's just a sea change in the character of individual Americans. It probably relates to organized activity of various kinds that is driving this spike. Again, whether it's a white supremacist militia or whether it's some other terrorist type group. And I think trying to make sure that we can address group liability in this space in the same way that we do in other spaces. We go after criminal organizations under a whole variety of statutes. We go after them as conspiracies. We go after them as racketeering conspiracies. We go after them in a variety of ways, and taking down the organization is often very helpful and important to the success of the final outcome.
Yeah, we want, Senator, to ensure that we have a robust set of tools to fully confront the threat of hate, and would welcome continued work with this committee to figure out what those additional tools might need to look like.
Will do, and thank you for the wonderful job you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Cotton?
Ms. Clarke, I want to return to the exchange you had with Senator Cornyn where you discussed defunding the police. You testified it's not the department's position or your position that the police should be defunded. So have you changed your mind since you wrote an op-ed in 2020 that the police should be defunded?
Thank you, Senator. I've never supported defunding the police. I'm here representing the department, which certainly does not support defunding the police. We are actively dispensing millions of dollars in grants to support our local and state law enforcement standing on the front lines. of crime and
The title
hate
of the
crime.
article said defund the police.
The article talked about some of the challenges that law enforcement faces today with respect to, for example, mental health needs that too often fall at the doorsteps of law enforcement. I'm here representing the department today, which believes deeply in ensuring that our law enforcement agencies have the support and resources needed to do their work.
So, okay, so it sounds to me like you changed your position, or at least your position from 2020 is not the department's position, but let's move on from funding the police to protecting the police. What's the department's latest position on qualified immunity? Should the qualified immunity that police officers enjoy from frivolous lawsuits be changed in any way?
That question, Senator, I would likely have to direct to my Office of Legislative Affairs. I'm happy to take the question back for.
Now, Office of Legislative Affairs just represents you to Congress. You're the policymaker. You're the one that would have input on these things. What's the department's position on qualified immunity? Should it change in any way? And presumptively, given the debates we've had here in Congress for the last year, if you think it should change, I assume you should think it should be lower, that it shouldn't be heightened.
Senator, I want to be very clear. I've not, in the Civil Rights Division, taken a position on this issue. I can't speak to whether or not there's another component inside the agency that has spoken to this, but this is not within the purview of the Civil Rights Division.
Okay, so police officers enjoy qualified immunity. What kind of immunity do prosecutors and judges enjoy?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I think the answer is absolute immunity. So the lawyers who have constructed our system have given themselves absolute immunity, I just want to say for the record, while police officers only get qualified immunity. Another way we protect the police is when they're acting in their official capacities, we defend them from frivolous lawsuits. Do you think it would make police officers less likely to perform their job zealously if they knew that political bosses were going to hang them out to dry and subject them to financial bankruptcy and ruin if they were sued for actions in the course of duty?
I stand in full support of our law enforcement agencies across the country, Senator. In the rare instance where a law enforcement officer may be pursued, for example, for a violation of law, I believe that under our Constitution, they are entitled to counsel and protection in the course of that lawsuit. But I support our law enforcement.
And it's the department's longstanding policy to either provide that representation or to reimburse legal fees if for some reason they can't provide representation. Isn't that right?
I'd want to take that question back just to make sure I get you an accurate answer, Senator.
I raise this because right now the department is hanging out to dry 4 United States Marshals who defended the courthouse in Portland from street militias in the summer of 2020. They're defending dozens of others, but for some reason they won't defend these 4, and the department won't give us any answers why they won't defend these 4, who I point out have all been returned to unrestricted active duty in high-risk positions. Presumably, if they were subject to criminal investigation or IG investigation or some other kind of disciplinary action, the department wouldn't be sending such marshals back into high-risk situations where violence, even lethal violence, is likely to be used. Ms. Clarke, were you or your division involved at all in the decisions about representing U.S. Marshals who were present defending the courthouse in Portland in 2020?
Senator, I believe that this is a matter that is most appropriate for our civil division. I'd want to get you an accurate answer. I'd welcome any
I know
questions
it's
you have
most
for
appropriate
this.
for the civil division. I do know that. But I'm asking you if you had any conversations in the department at any time about representing U.S. Marshals who defended the Portland courthouse.
I'd want the chance to take that question back and make sure I'm getting you an accurate answer, Senator.
So is your answer at the moment that you do not recall that you were engaged in any such conversations?
Well,
if that's your answer, that's fine. I understand you have a lot of conversations every day.
I'm generally familiar with the matter that you referenced that I believe is with our civil division. I'd want to make sure I get you an accurate response, Senator. So I'm happy to take a question back
Thank you.
to the department.
I would appreciate that. I look forward to getting the answer.
Senator from Arkansas is raising an issue which we've raised on the floor several times. He's put a hold on 6 U.S. attorneys and 2 U.S. Marshals. And as a consequence, their posts remain vacant. during this period of time. He is actually in the process of defunding law enforcement at the federal level. And it isn't because of anything that these individuals have done wrong or anything in their background that suggests they're not qualified. He is concerned about a case in Oregon and believes all U.S. attorneys should be held from performing their duties as a result of it. I disagree.
Could I say something?
Of course.
I haven't had a conversation with Senator Cotton on this, but if his request of you is this simple, all you got to say is why these people are being defended or not being defended to release these holes he has on, and I haven't discussed this with you, but why is it so darn difficult to just get a simple answer to a very simple question of why you aren't doing something?
Yes, Senator, I just want to make sure that you get an accurate answer. So I do want the opportunity to take that question back. I believe this is handled by our civil division. I don't know the answer, Senator. And I want to make sure that this committee has accurate answers and responses when it comes to the department's work. It's not a civil rights division issue.
Senator Grassley, they have been asked to defend 74, I understand, individuals who were working for the federal government in Portland, Oregon. They've agreed to defend 70, turned down 1, 3 are under review. I assume that there are circumstances here that they have not disclosed. They certainly haven't to the senator from Arkansas because he's not brought them up. But it appears to me that we have an attorney-client privilege issue, an issue of confidentiality with these employees. They may not want to go public with this. We don't know. We just know that 6 U.S. attorneys are sitting waiting for an opportunity to serve this country in law enforcement, and they're being held up for no reason related to them personally. It is a grievance which Senator from Arkansas has with the department.
So I'll just say that the fact that 70 have been approved for representation and 4 have not means that someone in the department must have reviewed these cases with particularity, and there's a reason why they're not representing the 4, and they will not give that reason. They will not give it not only to me, they will not give it to those 4 marshals and their lawyers either. And if Merrick Garland and Joe Biden thinks that they're going to get their political nominees in this department fast-tracked through the Senate while they are hanging career law enforcement officers out to dry, they've got another thing coming. And I'll just correct what the chairman said. It's not a handful of U.S. attorneys and U.S. marshals. It's every political nominee in the department, and every political nominee in the department will not get fast-tracked through this committee or the floor until these marshals get represented or until they get an answer.
So the senator from Arkansas is keeping U.S. attorney positions vacant across the United States. These are individuals responsible for prosecuting crimes. He calls them political appointees or whatever he wishes. They're being chosen in the ordinary course of business, just as every one of them was done under the previous president. And we're asking for the same treatment, but he says no. He wants us to somehow waive attorney-client privilege or confidentiality. I can't do that. I don't have the power to do that. I'm sure the attorney who's here, General Clarke, doesn't either. Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Clarke, for your service and your testimony. As you know, as has been discussed, HBCUs across the country and 3 HBCUs in my home state of Georgia, Spelman College, Albany State, and Fort Valley State University, all received terrorist bomb threats in February. I've been in close touch with the leadership at these schools. They are resilient institutions. The students and faculty are resilient and determined to continue their work, their learning, their enlightenment, their education in the face of these threats. And they have no intention of allowing them to instill fear or stoke division in our country. I'd like your assurance, Ms. Clarke, that the department will do everything in its power to investigate these threats, to hold accountable those responsible for these threats, and to be available to these institutions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to ensure that they're protected.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Hate crimes, threats targeting protected minority groups is an important part of our work at the Justice Department. This particular matter is currently with the FBI's Counterterrorism Unit. So I would direct the committee to that committee, direct the Judiciary Committee to the Counterterrorism Unit for the status of that investigation. What I can tell you, Senator, is that it's an important priority for the FBI. I understand that they have activated more than half of their field offices across the country to review and investigate this threat.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. And will you please follow up with me in my office after this hearing and before the end of the week with the name, phone number, and email address of a specific contact at the department who can be a dedicated liaison for HBCUs in Georgia who have questions regarding the ongoing investigation and questions about how they can access federal resources to protect themselves from such threats or incidents?
I will bring that request back to the department, Senator.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. I'd like to ask you a question now about the ongoing efforts to address hate crimes targeting Asian Americans. We've seen a significant increase. Next week, March 16th, will mark the one-year anniversary of the devastating massacre that took place in my state at 3 Asian-owned small businesses, killing 8, including 6 Asian American women. Following that event, Congress united to pass legislation to empower the Department of Justice to strengthen its efforts to work with local law enforcement and prevent such hate crimes. What progress has the department made in implementing that law and in responding to the ongoing elevated level of threat targeting Asian Americans across the country?
Thank you, Senator. Attorney General Merrick Garland has issued a memorandum in May of 2021 that calls for a number of things: increased resources to combat hate, the expedited review of hate crimes, which is something that we have instituted and prioritized in the Civil Rights Division, the designation of coordinators at U.S. attorneys' offices in the fight against hate, the creation of district alliances against hate. We've also worked to restore our community relations service and have prioritized the need to provide language access to ensure that no victim is barred from reporting a hate crime because of a language barrier. So there are a number of things that have happened across the department, and what I can tell you is that in the Civil Rights Division, we have doubled down on standing up to this threat, bringing more prosecutions to hold perpetrators accountable and to ensure that the rights of victims are vindicated.
One of the challenges that these incidents clarified is the difficulty that immigrant communities can have accessing the justice system or reporting incidents. I know you've recently spoken to the importance of language access. I wrote a letter to the Attorney General recently asking him to direct federal agencies to update their language access plans to ensure that not just in the context of justice administration of the Department of Justice, but also in the context of all services provided by federal agencies, that everyone in this country, every community in this country can access information that is vital to communities. Can you speak, please, to the importance of ensuring that in the court system and throughout the government, there be sufficient resources for immigrant communities to understand these civic services, regardless of whether English is their first language?
Incredibly important priority, Senator, for us. We want those who are victimized by hate across our country to reach out and lean on law enforcement, be that local and state law enforcement on the ground or at the federal level. And one of the things that we have worked to do at the Justice Department is to ensure that language is never a barrier. People can go right now to our reporting portal, and we have the ability to communicate with people in multiple languages, including a number of Asian languages. We want to ensure that every victim and every witness is able to bring forth complaints, because if we don't hear from them, then we'll never fully confront and end the crisis of hate crime gripping our country.
Thank you, Ms. Clarke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, General Clarke. We appreciate your testimony today and your service to our country, and we thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
We'll now call the second panel to the table. 3 individuals. If each of you would remain standing for just a moment, I'll administer the oath. Please raise your right hand. You affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
I said there were 3, there are 4. Welcome. I believe Senator Cornyn has asked if he could introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to introduce our final witness, Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker of the Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. Rabbi Charlie's originally from Lansing, Michigan, and he's dedicated his life to caring for those in need and living out his faith through service. After college, Rabbi Charlie worked at community centers in Michigan and Massachusetts, helping connect people with life-saving resources and job training skills. In 2006, he became an ordained rabbi and joined the Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, as its first full-time rabbi. Over the last 16 years, Rabbi Charlie has built bridges within that community, bringing together people with different viewpoints, backgrounds, and religious beliefs to foster a strong sense of community. On January the 15th of this year, a stranger knocked on the synagogue's door, and Rabbi Charlie welcomed the man with open arms, even making him a cup of tea. It soon became clear that this was not a man in need of shelter, but an armed anti-Semitic terrorist who held the rabbi and 3 other individuals at gunpoint. For 11 hours, Rabbi Charlie talked with the gunman to keep him calm, and when the moment was right, he acted to ensure his members could escape to safety. Harkening back to security training, which I know he will discuss here today, he convinced the gunman to take a drink of water, which created enough separation between the gunman and his weapon that the rabbi was able to throw a chair in the gunman's direction, distracting him. This swift action allowed the rabbi and the other hostages to escape safely before a shot was fired. I had the opportunity to visit with Rabbi Charlie in January and commend his incredible courage and quick thinking on that day. It's good to have the Rabbi Charlie here with us today, and it's an honor for you to appear at this important hearing on the disturbing rise in hate crimes. I think there's a lot we can learn from Rabbi Charlie's experience, and I look forward to his testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn. The rabbi is going to join us virtually after we introduce the other witnesses. Let me introduce them, brief introductions. Dr. Walter Kimbrough, thank you for being here. He served as president of Dillard University in Louisiana since 2012. Dillard University is one of nearly 30 HBCUs that have received bomb threats over the last few months. Elon Carr is the former special envoy for monitoring and combating anti-Semitism, served in the Trump administration. Currently a visiting fellow to combat anti-Semitism at the Heritage Foundation. I understand Senator Feinstein and Senator Padilla are happy to welcome the next witness, Detective Orlando Martinez, 27-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department and serves as the LAPD's hate crimes coordinator, currently detective supervisor in Robbery Homicide Division. Lastly, we're joined by Ms. Maya Berry, Executive Director of the Arab American Institute, a nonpartisan national civil rights organization. She also serves as co-chair of the Hate Crime Task Force at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. I've administered the oath, and I believe the first witness by Zoom, if he is connected, will be the rabbi. Could you proceed with your opening statement for 5 minutes, please?
Thank you. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you in person today. I want to acknowledge my senators from Texas, Senator Cornyn. Senator Cornyn, that introduction was beautiful. Thank you so much. And Senator Cruz, both who serve on this committee. Both were quite gracious to my congregation and to me personally in the aftermath of our crisis. And I'm pleased to have this opportunity to thank them for their support. And I want to thank each of you for the unanimous vote in the Senate condemning anti-Semitism and the attack on my congregation. I believe and often teach that Judaism is filled with contradictions because life is filled with contradictions. And today I am filled with mixed and even contradictory emotions. On the one hand, I'm truly horrified that in our society today, religious leaders must devote themselves to security training. How to harden our facilities is both a necessary conversation and anathema to religious ideals of hospitality and loving the stranger. At the same time, I am filled with gratitude. I'm grateful to be here. That feeling hasn't gone away. I'm grateful to be anywhere. I'm grateful to be anywhere because a terrorist chose a Jewish synagogue because he thought that Jews control the world. He thought that he could take Jews hostage, call up an influential rabbi, and she would snap her fingers and give him what he wanted. He truly believed that Jews control the media, that Jews control the government, that Jews control everything. Tragically, this is just one aspect of anti-Semitism that has been so harmful to the Jewish people throughout history. Over the centuries, entire Jewish communities have been destroyed because people believed that Jews drank the blood of non-Jewish children. Entire Jewish communities have been destroyed because people believed that Jews wanted to torture communion wafers. Entire Jewish communities have been destroyed because people believed that Jews were responsible for all of the bad things in life, that we are the root of all evil. And as absurd as it sounds, every single outrageous lie about the Jewish people has been shared in various forms by people from all walks of life in recent years. It's sad, it's ridiculous, it's maddening that I was taken hostage because of it. Far too many Jews have died because of it. And this anti-Semitism isn't distant history. This is less than 2 months ago. This is now. This is years of increased harassment and attacks against my people. On the morning of January 15th, when the gunman arrived, it was me and one volunteer in the building. I was running late. I was finishing my preparations for the service. And in the midst of trying to do a million different things, I had a stranger come to the door. He appeared to be who he said he was, a guy who spent a night outside in sub-40-degree weather, who just needed to warm up. Of course, I was wrong. I share this because after over 6 years worth of security courses, the development of an emergency action plan, and funding to better secure our facility, I still opened the door. But because of all of the courses and planning and funding, and literally dozens of small things that just happened to go our way, we were able to escape. No one should fear gathering to pray or celebrate or mourn or connect in their spiritual home. No one should experience such hatred and violence. In 1947, perhaps the leading rabbi of that time, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, told the Senate Labor Committee that equality of opportunity for Jews can be truly secured only in a genuinely democratic society. He continued, accordingly, we seek to fight every manifestation of racism, to promote the civil and political equality of all groups and persons in America, and to support measures designed to safeguard civil liberties and to build a better America. We regard ethnic discrimination directed against any group as a single and indivisible problem and as one of the most urgent problems of a democratic society. Nothing more gravely threatens American democracy today than the fact of its incompleteness. Democracy, to be secure, must be complete. An incomplete democracy is an insecure democracy. Members of the committee, I would add that the converse is equally true. An insecure democracy is an incomplete democracy, and too many communities in our democracy today feel insecure. Tragically, we live in a world where houses of worship need protection, where too many are victims of hate crimes. And I believe that both Democrats and Republicans want to change that reality. Changing our reality all at once is a bit too much to ask. That's why Rabbi Tarfon taught that we aren't obligated to complete the work, but we can't neglect it. I'm not here today asking you to complete the work, but we do need your help. Anyone who has ever asked, "Do I belong in this society?" needs your support. We are all struggling. People from all backgrounds, we need intelligent and practical solutions to help all of us feel safe and secure. It is an honor for me to speak with you today. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rabbi, and we are grateful for your leadership as well as your courage. And thank goodness you're here today to tell the story. Dr. Kimbrough.
Good afternoon, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and thank you for the invitation, members of the Committee on the Judiciary, and a special Louisiana acknowledgement to Senator Kennedy. My name is Walter Kimbrough, and I am the president of Dillard University in New Orleans. I am in my 18th year as an HBCU president, 10th at Dillard, and 7.5 at Philander Smith College in Little Rock. I also have the pleasure of currently serving as chair of the Council of Member Presidents of the 37 HBCUs which make up the United Negro College Fund, UNCF. We are all familiar with the story of the boy who cried wolf, which dates back to the 1400s, and even told a day as my 13-year-old son indicated that he knew the story. After repeated cries for help when there was no wolf, the village stops responding, the wolf shows up and eats the sheep. Over the past few weeks, I have begun to wonder, what happens if the wolf cries wolf? Since the beginning of January, we have seen an unprecedented number of threats against historically Black colleges and universities. These threats, the vast majority being bomb threats, have directly impacted almost half of the sector. For all practical purposes, every HBCU has been threatened. No other American institution has had such a large percentage of its constituency threatened. These threats have disrupted normal operations, causing classes to be canceled or hastily moved online. Unsettled students and parents already weary from the 2-year toll of COVID. And in cities like New Orleans, disrupted last fall by a hurricane which left an entire major American city without power for days, these threats take an even heavier toll. There are 3 points I wish to make today. First, returning to my analogy, the wolves have evolved. Described by the FBI as tech-savvy juveniles, HBCUs have received threats via numerous formats. Phone calls in the middle of the night or at random times during the day. Threats via email. Messages sent via gaming systems that can easily be missed. And while the bomb threats have garnered headlines, we have undercounted the threats to HBCUs. Murals on campuses defaced. Phone threats to intimidate students from voting or establishing polling locations on campus. The use of sophisticated technology has allowed these attacks to go unpunished now for 2 months. Second, we need federal law enforcement agencies to redouble their efforts to catch the wolves. Until the wolves realize that they can be caught and publicly held accountable, there is nothing to stop these threats from continuing. The lack of accountability does not only empower those who are engaging in these disruptions, but may encourage others to participate in this menacing mischief. Finally, you may have asked yourself, why did he suggest that the wolf is crying wolf? To date, there have been no bombs found, not even any evidence of a plan to actually bomb an institution. Due to the high number of threats, local agencies in some cities have modified their response. This new response now includes the elimination of bomb sweeps. Due to a lack of resources to conduct sweeps, or based on the high volume of hoaxes against HBCUs nationwide, some campuses have not benefited from full sweeps and are left to determine an all clear using their campus police and facilities teams. We are more vulnerable now than at the beginning of the threats. The wolves have cried wolf. The village responds but doesn't look for any wolves. We're at a point where there may be a wolf on campus, and it's now up to the boy to find it. Samuel Croxall, the 18th century Anglican churchman and writer who wrote a version of this story, said, "When we are alarmed with imaginary dangers in respect of the public, till the cry grows quite stale and threadbare, how can it be expected we should know when to guard ourselves against real ones?" We need a new plan from federal, state, and local law enforcement, a way to quickly and efficiently determine the veracity of threats, and not to leave this for campus officials without the tools to be able to complete this task thoroughly. Again, the priority needs to be catching those who are making the threats. The same intensity of manpower and technology used to track and thwart international terrorist cells is required to disband domestic terrorists. As the real-life hunting of wolves has evolved from a huge capital and manpower-intensive operation to a more sophisticated approach, the same is required to end the threats against HBCUs. The wolves have cried wolf almost 60 times in 2 months. We know they're doing it. We need to catch them before they show up.
Thank you, Dr. Kimbrough. Detective Martinez.
I want to personally thank Chair Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, Senators Feinstein and Padilla, and the distinguished members of the committee for the privilege of contributing this report on our efforts combating the rise in hate crimes. Reported hate crimes have risen across the nation, including in Los Angeles. A bias-motivated crime, or hate crime, is a crime motivated in whole or in part by the actual or perceived legally protected characteristic of another, or association with one of these characteristics. The term hate can be misleading. When used in hate crime law, the word hate does not only mean anger or rage. In this context, hate means any bias against people or groups with those characteristics defined by law. This bias can be negative attitudes or a perception that the persons with these characteristics are inferior, or a perception of the victim as being weak or fair game because of that protected characteristic. People rarely call emergency services and report they have been the victim of a hate crime. Victims report criminal acts against them, or if they feel unsafe, or if they witness something they believe needs police response. Officers respond, conduct their investigations, determine if it meets the elements of a hate crime, and document that criminal act. This is where training is vital. If an officer doesn't recognize and document the elements of bias or hate, that leads to underreporting and loss of public trust. The victim, the victim's family, their friends, the communities feel they won't be taken seriously the next time they call. Recognizing that hate crimes not only affect the victim, but entire communities sharing the same protected characteristics, our officers' primary focus is ensuring victims receive the information and care needed to overcome this heinous act against them. These victims have been targeted for aspects that they cannot change nor control, and the fear of being the next target may soon spread throughout the community. Although there is no legal definition of a hate incident, it is commonly referred to as any non-criminal act, including words, directed against a person based on that person's protected characteristic. Hate incidents are differentiated from hate crimes because they do not violate criminal law. My department completes an investigative report for non-criminal hate incidents, which helps us track bias-motivated events across the city. Although these reports do not document criminal activity, they assist us to be proactive when a hotspot is identified and to prevent problems before they can become criminal in nature. We also created our own training programs from the ground up because most of the offered hate crime training programs only dealt with white supremacy, white nationalists, and homegrown extremists. In reality, most bias-motivated crimes occur between strangers on the street, and the suspects don't show any outward or obvious signs of bias before the incident. In addition to training, the department applied for and received a federal grant focused on the rise of Asian American Pacific Islander bias-motivated crimes in the city of Los Angeles. The grant will be focused on the elderly, disabled persons, and those without language or technological skills to research modern hate crime resource information. Collaboration between federal and state agencies is also key to combating hate crimes. The investigation of a hate crime involving a member of a white nationalist group led to the creation of the Los Angeles Area Hate Crimes Task Force. The task force is currently comprised of 7 LA County law enforcement agencies and the FBI. The task force has led to several successful investigations and state and federal charges and out-of-state arrests. Hate crime reporting and data collection is also critical. Correctly classifying hate crimes, documenting hate incidents, and using the data to formulate effective responses to prevent future incidents of hate will benefit not only the police agencies, but the communities they serve. In closing, although hate crimes and hate incidents continue to rise across the country and in Los Angeles, I believe that the increased reporting is a sign that residents' trust in their local and federal law enforcement agencies is increasing. Each instance of law enforcement responding effectively and compassionately will spread throughout the underserved communities, building that necessary bond of cooperation needed to protect that and the next victim. Thank you.
Thanks, Officer Martinez. Mr. Carr.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, honorable members of the committee, thank you for convening this deeply important hearing. Senators, anti-Semitism is rising, not only overseas, but right here at home. The most recent FBI statistics show that crimes against Jews amount to 60% of all religious-based hate crimes. And recent polling conducted by the Brandeis Center found that a stunning 65% of Jewish university students surveyed felt unsafe on campus because of physical or verbal attacks, and half felt the need to conceal their Jewish identity or support for Israel. These findings are truly alarming. But rather than dwell on the extent of the problem, allow me to respectfully propose 7 tangible measures that, if implemented, would go a long way to reversing this terrible trend. First, we should develop online tolerance programs for criminal defendants who show signs of radicalization. Many law enforcement officers, including prosecutors, do not have the tools to counter the process of radicalization in suspects motivated by ethnic, religious, or similar status-based hatred. I used to be a career criminal prosecutor, and I've prosecuted hate crimes. When I prosecuted cases where hatred of the victim's identity was a factor, I would never close such a case before requiring the individual to undergo a tolerance program. In Los Angeles County, we're fortunate to have the Museum of Tolerance, a wonderful institution to which I personally have sent defendants and which makes a life-changing impact on those who experience it. But most counties or federal districts don't have access to an institution like that. The federal government can make a critical difference here by developing and assisting states to develop online tolerance programs of equivalent efficacy. Second, we should enforce Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in cases of anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment on campus. President Obama's education guidance made clear that Title VI prohibits anti-Semitic discrimination, and President Trump issued an executive order that further clarifies the application of Title VI to protect Jewish university students. Yet despite this bipartisan consensus, OCR at the Department of Education has been slow to adjudicate Title VI complaints involving anti-Semitism. This should be rectified at once. Sadly, campuses have become hotbeds of hostility toward Jews and Jewish identity, especially when related to Zionism and the State of Israel. When that hostility gives rise to harassment and discrimination, we must apply the law to protect Jewish students. Third, we should adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism. Defining anti-Semitism is a critical first step in combating it, and the IRA definition is the global standard for doing so. It's a tool of education, not of censorship. Its greatest utility lies in its inclusion of 11 examples of contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism, which allow us to understand the different forms that anti-Semitism can take. Once adopted, the IRA definition should be used in training programs, especially for law enforcement personnel and university administrators. Fourth, the Department of Homeland Security should improve, expand, and streamline its nonprofit security grant program. Senator Coons mentioned this in the earlier panel. It's of critical importance that potentially targeted community institutions be able to make the investments to protect themselves. An expansion and improvement of NSGP is an essential step in achieving this. Fifth, we should devote resources to countering the torrents of hate on the internet and social media without violating free speech protections. To address this challenge within the framework of the First Amendment, Secretary Pompeo and I convened the first ever U.S. government-sponsored conference focused on combating online hate. A number of solutions were presented. We should continue to encourage this work through follow-on conferences, working groups, and grants because there can be no solution to rising anti-Semitism that does not also focus on the primary vehicles through which hatred is currently being propagated. Sixth, we should combat anti-Semitism proactively through philo-Semitism. No battle can ever be won only by playing defense. Going on the offense against anti-Semitism requires that we drive a narrative that inculcates an understanding and appreciation of the remarkable story of the Jewish people and the values of Judaism that played a central role in the founding, heritage, and continuing mission of the United States. Jewish American Heritage Month is a key vehicle for doing that. It has to be made impactful. Seventh and finally, we should formalize the Special Envoy's domestic mandate. During my time in office, in addition to my overseas statutory role, the White House requested that I work with the interagency to focus on domestic anti-Semitism as well. We cannot be successful in combating domestic anti-Semitism unless we place someone in charge of it. The last White House determined that the special envoy should be that person rather than another government official because of the global character of anti-Semitism, the borderless nature of the internet and social media, the special envoy's expertise and staffing, and the need for coordinated messaging and policy. But this was never formalized in the last administration, and Congress now has the opportunity to do so. Senators, these 7 measures do not exhaust the list of what can be done, but they represent attainable actions that will likely produce far-reaching results. If we focus on achievable steps such as these, I'm confident that we can roll back the scourge and build that better future that our children so richly deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Ms. Berry?
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for convening this important hearing and for including our perspective. A core belief of the Arab American Institute is that for our country to live up to its ideals, we must ensure strong civil rights and civil liberties protections for all. For more than 35 years, AI has worked to empower Arab Americans, combat discrimination and bias, improve hate crime data collection and reporting, support efforts to improve government oversight and accountability, and defend the rights of all, including the rights of the most vulnerable among us who've been targeted by hate. As is clear from the convening of this hearing, this committee understands our country continues to experience an increase in hate crime, and we must formulate a better policy response to combat it. To adequately respond, including prevention efforts, we must have a full understanding of the threat targeted communities are facing, and that requires accurate hate crime data collection and reporting. It is established fact that we do not have that. While my written testimony offers a thorough discussion of the problems of flawed hate crime statistics and what we can do about it, I want to take this opportunity to highlight a few key takeaways from the FBI's 2020 data. With a reported 8,263 hate crimes in 2020, we have a 13% increase over 2019 and the highest annual total since 2011, when hate crimes against Arab Americans, American Muslims, and those perceived to be Arab or Muslim surged in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. This is a continuation of the increase we have seen since the 2016 presidential campaign began. Once again, hate crimes targeting Black Americans accounted for a majority of those motivated by race, ethnicity, or ancestry, and a plurality of all hate crimes reported. With 2,871 incidents, it is a 49% increase since 2019. And again, once again, Hate crimes targeting the American Jewish community represent a majority of the religiously motivated hate crimes. This despite a 28% decrease from 2019 data. Hate crimes targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islander communities increased significantly in 2020, with 279 anti-Asian hate crimes and 15 anti-Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander hate crimes reported. It represents a 64% increase over 2019 and the greatest number of anti-AAPI hate crimes reported in more than 2 decades. Finally, with 266 incidents, we saw a 34% increase reported hate crimes motivated by gender identity, the vast majority of those targeting the anti-transgender. Additionally, some of the deadliest hate crimes, including those that have targeted Black, Jewish, and Latino communities, have been perpetrated by white supremacists seemingly motivated by the threat of, quote, great replacement theory. As such, the National Hate Crime Reporting System is not the only federal data collection effort requiring increased congressional oversight. Returning to the hate crime data, the recent passage with bipartisan support of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which includes the Khalid Jabara and Heather Heyer No Hate Act, is an important first step to achieving what Congress demanded we do with the passage of the Hate Crime Statistics Act 30 years ago in 1990. And that is simply collect data about hate crimes. Jabara Heyer implements an innovative reporting framework to improve hate crime data and assist hate crime victims and their communities by promoting a community-centered approach. We're grateful to the leadership of Senators Blumenthal, Hirano, and Durbin for their support of Jabara Heyer. Its passage and now implementation serve as an important step to meaningful mandatory reporting. To get us there, however, Congress must impose conditions on existing sources of federal funding streams to jurisdictions, specifically tie their funds directly to their ability to fully participate in hate crime reporting, moving it from voluntary to mandatory. In short, there are 2 main challenges of hate crime reporting and data collection. The first is getting victims to report hate crimes, and second is ensuring that law enforcement report hate crimes that come to their attention. While I have focused on the latter, addressing the community barriers to reporting is also critical. According to estimates from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, approximately 56% of hate crime victimizations from 2010 to 2019 were not reported to police. To be sure, addressing both challenges will require transformation in policing practices and justice reform, comprehensive education and training, and reform of some state and local government hate crime laws and policies. Finally, given the subject matter of hate crime prevention enforcement, I've focused on statistics and the complicated technicalities of how they gather and the need for improving them. However, missing entirely from my testimony were the stories of the people in the vulnerable communities found in the data, targeted because of their race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity, simply targeted for who they are. So as we collectively work to improve our policy, we must remember that it must be done because individuals and communities are not free if they're subject to bias-motivated hate and violence. As elected officials, you must lead to change policy. Recognizing the limits of legal policy responses to hate violence, you must also lead in condemning bigotry in all its forms, including refraining from putting forward discriminatory policy proposals. That too is our collective responsibility. And the ability of Rabbi Charlie's congregation to worship safely at their synagogue, or Dr. Kimbrough's students to attend classes freely of threats, that is what is at stake. They and other vulnerable communities targeted are not abstract data points. They're people harmed by hate crimes, and we must do better to protect them. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Ms. Berry, and thanks to every member of the panel. We can certainly get into a discussion that would go on for a long time with the issues that you've raised. I'll try to just highlight a couple that come to mind. Detective Martinez, I don't need to tell you that the focus at Spotlight has been on law enforcement when it comes to community relationships, prejudice of purported prejudice against some officers in their treatment of individuals. When you are in the process, you've done this for 27 years, when you're in the process of trying to square the new recruit with the job ahead of them and understanding the power that they have and also the vulnerability they have, how do you screen or how do you train to try to take bias out of the equation?
Chair, I concentrate on doing the hate crime training. So when it comes to the selection and the ethics trainings that the department gives, I'm not very familiar with how they go about enforcing those options.
I see. That is something that I've thought about because it doesn't just apply to law enforcement. I've talked to General Milley about our military because we are expecting them to serve their country without bias toward any group, and that's a big ask. Mr. Carr, you raised an issue in my mind, which is part of what we have to cope with here, and that is the use of social media and what it means for fomenting hatred and organizing hatred. You said you had a conference with Secretary Pompeo, I believe, on the subject. Someone has to decide, whether it's Facebook or someone else, whether something that's content being put on the internet is acceptable. And in a country that honors free speech, this becomes very difficult. What did you conclude?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So this is a huge issue. I mean, for all the good that the internet and social media have brought to our lives, there's no question that this is the chief vector of not only anti-Semitism, but so many of our societal pathologies. And addressing this is absolutely critical. Of course, doing that without censorship and without violating the First Amendment is critical. And that's why we convened this conference. There were a number of solutions. Among them, using artificial intelligence to analyze social media posts in real time, not only to be able to predict when and where violence is likely to occur, which actually there's enormous work in this area, but also to be able to channel and counter responses to these, propagating hubs of hate in social media. Another one is creating partnerships between civil society and internet advertisers so that dollars voluntarily can be channeled away from hateful content. Creating networks of internet users who can collaborate to challenge hateful posts with volume, and therefore meet, before hateful posts are likely to gain traction. And now with AI analysis, we can determine the type of post that is more likely to go viral, countering it early, and forming networks of collaborators who will actually counter that with positive messaging. By the way, that's the ultimate in a First Amendment response, right? Meet hateful speech with positive speech. That's productive. And then finally, using social media and the internet as platforms to educate users, to educate Holocaust deniers about the Holocaust, using credible third-party platforms like the Holocaust Museum, which has remarkable material on this, or IRA. I talked about the importance of IRA. One of the things we said in our conference is how important it would be for the large internet platforms and the tech companies to adopt the IRA definition. Again, not as a tool of censorship, but as a tool of education, so that users can be educated. These are all solutions that can work and that have worked, but we need to encourage this and continue following on these sorts of this sort of work.
Thank you. Ms. Berry and Rabbi Charlie, I want to ask you both the same question. I believe that those of us sitting on this side of the dais have a particular responsibility too as elected officials. Our language, our treatment of individuals is being watched, and it's a teaching moment whether we know it or not. There have been some extraordinary examples of good behavior, and let me first start by crediting a member of the other party. And I thought the President George W. Bush, after the 9/11 incident and his statement about the people of the Muslim religion, was an exceptional moment in our history. He said the right thing at the right moment, and I think it really, it didn't solve all the problems, but it put us in the right direction. I'd like to ask you, Ms. Berry, as well as Rabbi Charlie, to comment on the role of leadership, political leadership in particular, when it comes to the fomenting or discouraging hate.
Should I defer to the Rabbi first?
You want to go first?
Certainly.
You turned off your mic, I think.
There we go. Thank you, Chairman Durbin. You're exactly right. Those statements, those words post 9/11, I think helped save people's lives. This body and the House of Representatives, both within days of the attacks, also passed congressional resolutions saying not to scapegoat Arab Americans, American Muslims, South Asians, and others in response to that. When I talked about the increase in hate crime that we've been seeing, you can track it from the 2016 presidential campaign to now. And it's regrettable how much of an increase we've seen during this period. And I do think, I'm very careful in how we talk about it. I don't want to say there's a correlation between speech and data. But there is a particular problem when this language emanates from policyholders, emanates from the highest elected officials that we have. It almost allows someone to think that their targeting of this individual is perhaps the right thing to do. So in my community, we saw it post-oil embargo in the 70s. In the Asian American community, it's experiencing it now. You do have it as a response to people saying COVID-19 can be blamed on you. And it's a detriment, it's harmful, and it really does impact people in their livelihood.
Thank you. Rabbi Charlie, would you like to comment?
Please. Thank you, Chairman Durbin. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is a really important point because this was what happened in our synagogue was a situation where someone actually believed outrageous rhetoric, lies about the Jewish people. When it comes to hatred, interrupting that hatred matters. Having the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum gives great credence to this notion of upstanders and the idea of not bystanders, but upstanders who will intervene, who not only will watch their language from the outset, but intervene and point out that and educate and teach people that the language that they're using can actually be really harmful. It's a lot to ask, unfortunately. I don't know if it's a lot to ask. I guess I would say that if we could all tone down the rhetoric and focus on solving problems, instead of trying to win political points, that would be a benefit to all of us on all sides of the aisle. We need solutions, and toning down the rhetoric is one of those first steps that really will make an impact. Toning down the hatred, and when we see it, to condemn it in all forms would make a big difference.
Thank you, Rabbi. Senator Grassley?
I guess I'm the last person between you and lunch. Mr. Carr, I was very disappointed the FBI didn't immediately recognize the Colleyville attack was a hate crime against Jewish people. Is it correct that many international terrorism movements contain an anti-Semitic ideology? And should the government consider possible hate motives when investigating terrorists?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. You could not be more correct. If you look at those movements today that have as a core defining ideological feature anti-Semitism, those movements are not only threats to Jews, they certainly are that, but they're really threats to America and to civilization. Of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these are movements that are defined through anti-Semitism, and they are deep, profound threats to all of us, which is why fighting Jew hatred is not only about protecting Jews, it really is about championing American values and protecting all of us. You had mentioned in your questioning of Assistant Attorney General Clarke exactly this point about the initial FBI statements following the Colleyville crisis. And I think that's a very apt point. You know, training law enforcement, and she mentioned this as well in her answer to you, training law enforcement personnel is very important. Well, again, we have a global standard definition of anti-Semitism, which if we adopted it and used it, could be used to train law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and investigators, which would likely avoid the kind of confusion, let's say, that followed the Colleyville attack. So I think this is really a case in point of how important it is to use a vehicle like the IRA definition of anti-Semitism in training, and not only for law enforcement, by the way, for campuses and university administrators. Universities now have become the front lines in many cases in the battle against Jewish students. And it's very important to use IRA, again, as a tool of education, not of censorship.
Mr. Martinez, understand that you have observed an uptick in hate crimes in Los Angeles, and you're the coordinator there for that sort of investigation. where are you observing that hate crimes are up most, and who is emboldened to commit those crimes?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. Yeah, so hate crimes are up across the board. When they've been continuously up for the past 5 years, increasing, except for anti-religion, which declined slightly last year because of the pandemic. Our biggest increases percentage-wise would be against the AAPI community in Los Angeles. Our highest numbers are against the Black community in Los Angeles. However, it's not, we don't have white nationalists, white supremacists coming into the city. What we have in our urban areas is we have resident on resident committing hate crimes against each other. One of the things I like to point out is our definition of a hate crime would not qualify for federal prosecution. The federal has this very strict standard of the but-for, where it has to be, it wouldn't have happened without the bias motivation. Our state and a lot of states have different classifications. We're usually second. Los Angeles are usually second in the nation to New York every year. And we report our hate crimes as we classify them, not as the federal government would classify them. So when we talk about training, we can't go by federal training for our situation.
Okay. And Rabbi, I won't repeat what everything's been said about your bravery, but it's quite obvious and work to save everybody that was in your congregation. So this simple question, what would you most recommend to other houses of worship to be prepared for the worst?
I would recommend security training. I would recommend, well, all of us work towards changing our reality. Our current reality is something that we need to work on. I would recommend again, for us, for our successful resolution, we were blessed to have really positive relationships between us and our local police department, which not every community has. We need to work on those relationships. They have been in our building, they knew our situation. The relationship between our local police department and the FBI and our relationship with the FBI was incredibly valuable. To go through those courses, to develop those security action plans, those emergency action plans, which are not just good in terms of hostage situations, they're good in terms of a fire or a tornado or any situation that might be of concern in a house of worship. The increase in the nonprofit security grant program is hugely important. It's hugely needed, especially for smaller congregations like mine, smaller congregations that don't have a dedicated staff person to spend hours and hours and hours going through the bureaucracy and writing the grants. It's very challenging to streamline that process, especially for smaller congregations. There's a number of things that could help, and there's a number of actions that houses of worship can take, as can Congress and our government. But that support between national, state, local governments and our houses of worship, it really means a great deal. We need that communication, that support, that relationship. It matters. It matters a great deal, and it truly, ultimately helped to save our lives.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. This panel has been very meaningful, and I think one of the lessons for us is, Detective Martinez, that we need to support and resource our law enforcement, most especially police on the ground, who assist synagogues, mosques, places of worship, as well as other potential targets of hate crimes. And I know that you have spoken very forcefully about this topic and the kind of training and insight that are necessary to identify hate crimes and investigate and prosecute them successfully. And I believe you would agree that online hate often leads to acts of violence in the real world, correct? You're nodding, which I take as an agreement.
That's an agreement, yes.
And that we need to monitor and even police online hate so as to know and anticipate when it may appear as it did in Colleyville in the real world.
Yeah, having the resources to, one of the things that law enforcement does not do well is being proactive. And having those resources to be proactive and to try to prevent these things before they happen would be a great help and mitigate some things that we cannot control and some things that we can.
We have money in the omnibus that will go to police organizations and law enforcement, local police departments, as well as states, and to community organizations. They're important to support as well, correct?
Very important. One of the things that we do not have is manpower. In Los Angeles, we partner with the Anti-Defamation League, and they are wonderful at patrolling the internet and bringing things to our attention that maybe our analysts miss. The more eyes, the better. So working together to protect everybody and be as proactive as possible before the event.
Rabbi, you and I haven't met, but like many on our panel here and many around the nation, even the world, I admired your courage and your congregation's bravery in the course of dealing with the hate crime committed by this individual who invaded your synagogue. And I think it was a traumatic experience for your congregation and also for all people of goodwill who revere places of worship and respect their sanctity, whether they are mosques, churches, synagogues, or others. What would you say to the world about the traumatic effects and maybe some hopeful message about how to counter hate?
Thank you for the opportunity. I would say that the response that we received was overwhelming. The amount of love and support. I still have literally hundreds of cards that I just haven't been able to get through because we received so much support. And it meant so much because we didn't necessarily have to get that support. People didn't necessarily have to offer that to us. And what a blessing. Every group, right? If every HBCU received thousands and thousands of letters expressing love and support, it doesn't solve the problem. We have to address these issues, but it would make a difference. If every child who's transgender that has been bullied would receive love and support from their community to let them know that it's just a small group of people that really share that hatred and that everyone else supports them. That's what we need before something happens. Before we need that sense of empathy. We need to share that love. Love the stranger means that people are going to be strange and we're not going to agree. And we need to do what we can to express that love of those who are different from us as human beings. We need to recognize the dignity and beauty of every individual. Before something bad happens, we need to bring that empathy in advance and not wait for things that are tragic.
I think those very eloquent comments epitomize some of the reasons why we've worked so hard, many of us in this body, to try to fight hate and violence wherever it occurs, whatever the motivations are, because it is a small group of people, and the truly overwhelming majority of Americans despise hatred and violence, which impacts so traumatically people of goodwill. And I thank you, Rabbi, for sharing those comments. They will have meaning to people in Connecticut and the country, as will the testimony that's been offered today by all of you. Thank you for being here today. It will help us move forward in this area. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the witnesses for being here today. Rabbi Charlie, welcome. I'm proud to see a fellow Texan here. I wish it were under different circumstances, that the horrific terrorist attack that you and your synagogue faced, that caused the eyes of Texas and the world to be upon you, we all wish that had not occurred. I will say, in the hours that you and your fellow congregants were held hostage, Heidi and I were lifting you up in prayer. Texans across the state, Americans, people across the world were lifting you up in prayer. As you know, and you and I have spoken before, I've spoken with each of the congregants who were hostages with you. We saw federal law enforcement, we saw local law enforcement, state law enforcement working hand in hand to deal with that hostage situation. I spoke with the special agent in charge of the FBI during that hostage crisis to make sure that all the federal resources needed were available to try to resolve it and resolve it peacefully. But it was striking to me, Rabbi, having spoken with each of your fellow congregants that were trapped alongside you, the calm that you demonstrated, the wisdom that you demonstrated, the courage that you demonstrated. You described to me how the security training you and your fellow congregants had may well have played the decisive role saving the lives of each of you. You described how you deliberately staged near the exit door to be able to find a way to escape if the opportunity presented itself. And then I heard, not from you, but from your fellow congregants, how when the hostage taker briefly set his gun down, how you picked up the chair and threw it at him, which gave the brief window of time for you and the other hostages to run out of the door and escape to safety. That heroism was extraordinary. It has given you an opportunity to speak out against the evils of anti-Semitism. Tragically, anti-Semitism is a unique evil that has plagued the world for millennia. And there are far too many synagogues and far too many churches that face the risk of violence, face the risk of terrorism. It is heartbreaking that synagogues and churches and mosques and houses of worship need security. A great many houses of worship today have armed police officers protecting the congregations. In Texas, as you know, we've seen multiple churches and synagogues targeted for terrorism, sometimes ending tragically with a horrific loss of life, sometimes, as in your instance, ending with heroism and the blessings of God, saving the lives of each of the individuals who are hostages. I can tell you the Jewish community in Texas was deeply focused, was transfixed on Congregation Beth Israel during and after the crisis. I was proud to join with John Cornyn and Jackie Rosen in authoring a resolution in the Senate that was sponsored by 55 senators and ultimately passed the Senate unanimously, honoring the Congregation Beth Israel, expressing our gratitude that for your heroism and calling out the evils of anti-Semitism. But Rabbi Charlie, one of the things that I found, speaking with leaders of the Jewish community in North Texas, and in particular with the president of your synagogue, was focus on the need for more funding, for security training, for security resources, for hardening infrastructure, for protecting against the loss of innocent life. And growing out of that conversation with the leaders of the Jewish community in North Texas, I'm going to be introducing a bill to triple the federal funding currently directed to security grants to nonprofit entities, including houses of worship, which would increase the total amount available to $540 million. Rabbi, if you could, I'd like you to elaborate on, in your view, how additional security resources could be leveraged to prevent another incident like the one you experienced, and not just for Congregation Beth Israel, but for the entire Jewish community and for houses of worship across the country.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Senator, and it's good to see you again. Those funds, and again, policy experts might be able to do better than I. I know that more funds are needed, that it is horrible that we live in this world where those funds are needed. It is horrible that we live in a world where our children, as a part of their normal lives, have lockdown drills. That's a horrible thing. And yet that's the reality that we live in, and we have to respond to that reality. And we need everything from, again, especially in smaller congregations like mine, funds for security officers, funds for security cameras that are up to date, that are digital as opposed to analog, that are high quality. There are other security opportunities that each congregation really needs to focus in, to talk with local law enforcement, to develop those relationships, to do walkthroughs. And we have great appreciation for the Secure Communities Network. We have great appreciation for the FBI. We have great appreciation for the local police department and the ADL, all of whom have helped us develop our security plans. And the idea is that for each congregation has to tailor it to them and their needs. I will say that those funds, as a part of that funding, there needs to be support for smaller congregations like mine. We need help with writing those grants, working through that bureaucracy. We need the assistance of state government, of the federal government, to make sure that we don't just look at all the paperwork and give up. It's wonderful to have the funds available. For smaller congregations, 100 households, 200 households, we can't just look at the paperwork and say this is too much. So there's lots of ways that this funding will help, and that the nonprofit security grant program can be modified to be able to be more effective for more congregations and more houses of worship. The idea of tripling funding in and of itself is incredible, and I would encourage I would encourage passage of such a bill. And I would also encourage the tweaking of the program so that it can run as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, and that is helpful and productive advice.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, just continuing on some of the themes that have been explored throughout the morning. Also to recognize that FBI data shows that criminal incidents targeting the Jewish community account for over half of all religious-based crimes. Sadly, in California, we've witnessed a 40% increase in anti-Semitic incidents over the last 5 years. And when considering that a good amount of hate crime data is not even reported at all, it's clear that there's work to be done so that all people feel comfortable and safe in their communities? My first question is for the Rabbi. Earlier in the hearing, you provided sort of a message to not just the Jewish community, but others who may feel targeted by hate crimes. But as important as that is, we don't always necessarily hear from actual victims of incidents, what effect that hate crime has had on them emotionally, psychologically, folks, their loved ones, others in their network and their daily lives. So, Rabbi, what unique message might you have for victims of hate crimes? Maybe an encouragement of what and how to share their stories and their experiences for others to learn from, and to the extent that you're comfortable. You shared a lot since that day through press and elsewhere, but if there's anything else that you think is worth sharing with the committee as we're digesting this.
I would say that mental health resources are vital. This is something that I've taught about, preached about. We know that mental health is a huge issue, and people need to know and need to be encouraged, from law enforcement to the victims of crimes, to the fact that in this instance, let me just go back before Colleyville, when Tree of Life happened, when the shooting at Tree of Life took place, all of us were impacted. All Jews, and I think that so many more people were impacted in the same way that so many other horrible things that have happened, especially when it comes to hate crimes, go far beyond just that moment, just that community, just the individuals who were in the room. That's the damage of hate crimes that was mentioned previously by another panelist. The idea, though, of getting mental health resources is probably the most important, and knowing that there almost always could be more. I spoke with the 911 operator, and I encouraged her to see a therapist. I've talked with the local police chiefs in our community, encouraging them to make sure that this was traumatic for all of us. And we need those resources, and we need to take advantage of those opportunities. Mental health is one of the most important ways. Caring for our mental health is the most important way to do so, to help with that, to help those who have experienced trauma, whether they were in the room or not.
Right. I appreciate you recognizing that as victims of other crimes, hate crimes and otherwise, have come to learn it's okay to not feel okay and to talk about it. On a different topic, I know our time is limited here, but question on the importance of data collection. Now, California is one of 26 states that requires the collection of hate crime data by way of mandatory reporting from law enforcement. However, 20 states currently have no law requiring law enforcement to collect and report hate crime data, leaving the option, emphasis on option, to submit data to FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, completely voluntary. Now, federal law enforcement agencies use the Uniform Crime Reporting Program to collect crime statistics, but given the variation in hate crime laws across the country, it's easy to understand how it could be difficult to ascertain when hate crimes have occurred, and difficult to develop holistic responses that address their underlying causes. Detective Martinez, welcome. As the Hate Crimes Task Force Coordinator for LAPD, you're directly involved in assessing how useful the collection of data can be when combating hate crimes. So understanding the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act was a helpful step towards addressing hate crimes. What additional steps would you urge Congress to take to incentivize reporting from state and local law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator. I keep going back to encouraging the training. There's just so many things that I'm fortunate to have that smaller agencies don't. Most folks don't realize that we don't report hate crimes. The hate crime law is a misdemeanor, punishable by 1 year and up to 5,000. What we do is another 99% of the time, it's another criminal offense that has a bias motivation to it. So when you have the UCR coding, they just have to enter a code to make that bias motivated, this other aggravated assault, simple assault. Tying, somebody else had mentioned it, tying funds for training for programs to their reporting is always a good incentive. It won't guarantee anything, but you have to have some type of enforcement arm, because if you don't have a buy-in from the head of the agency, like I have from my chief, it's not going to trickle down, and that's why you have zeros. Statistically improbable that these locations with millions or hundreds of thousands of residents have zero hate crimes year after year after year, and yet that's what's being reported.
Thank you for that. Now, just add that those who are selecting and hiring chiefs of police, sheriffs, et cetera, across the country, whether non-elected, I'm talking about sheriffs specifically, whether it's mayors, city councils, et cetera, elevating the importance of mandating hate crime reporting so that they take that into consideration in whether it's personnel evaluations and hiring to begin with of leaders of law enforcement agencies. So a lot of work that remains to be done here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ossoff is joining us virtually, I believe. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists. Rabbi, I want to first of all convey to you the love and support of the Jewish community in Georgia. And while you were still in the midst of this ordeal, and in the hours and days that followed, I spoke with rabbis across the state, with community leaders across the state. And I want to make sure to just convey to you personally and directly that the Jewish community in Georgia stood with you and stands with you 100%, that we have your back and your congregation's back. And if there's anything that we can do, that I can do to support you as you continue to process and rebuild and move through what your congregation experienced and how you were attacked, that we're here to do so. And I'd also like to invite you, when you have the moment, Rabbi, to come and visit with us in Georgia, and to sit down with Rabbis Berg and Anderson and Siegel and other Jewish faith leaders, with Dov Wilker at the AJC, with Eric Robbins at the Federation, and invite you to share lessons learned, your experience, and to engage in fellowship with the Jewish community in Georgia, whenever convenient for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I look forward to the opportunity.
Well, look forward to welcoming you. And I'd like to ask you, drawing upon your wisdom and experience as a faith leader, and having just experienced this profound attack, anti-Semitic attack on your congregation, reflecting on where we are as a people, as a nation, in the context of political division and polarization and an increase in hate crimes and hate speech and threats. I reflect upon the lessons that Congressman Lewis taught us. And he would always say that no matter who we are, no matter where we come from, we're one people, we're one family, and we all live in one house. What, in your view, does this country need to do, to consider, to recommit to, as private citizens, as faith communities, perhaps as a government, in order to revitalize that spirit of unity and tolerance and peaceful coexistence?
Actually, over the past couple of days, I was a part of the Global Faith Forum, which was organized by Pastor Bob Roberts, an evangelical pastor in Keller, just down the road. And he was preaching about and teaching about how evangelical Christians and Muslims and Jews and people from all different backgrounds, we need to get past the fact that we're different from each other. We need to actually be able to work together, because no one wants to see the violence that we see in our community. No one wants to see the hatred that we see in our community. And that opportunity that people who are not necessarily our natural partners, those are the people we have to reach out to. We have to be able to reach out to anyone if we want a sense of unity, if we want to reduce the hate, if we want to develop relationships, build relationships for individuals in any community. That idea of building relationships with our neighbors, it's hard to hate somebody. It's hard to hate somebody that you know, right? That just because, right? If you can ask them a question, if you can approach them with curiosity and understanding, as opposed to judgment and assumptions, right? Whether we're talking about politics or religion, cultural differences, ethnic differences, if we build relationships with one another, we're really reducing the potential for hate in our world.
Thank you, Rabbi. And, you know, my great-grandparents came to the United States in 1911 and 1913 from Eastern Europe to escape anti-Semitism and to seek opportunity in a land where the possibility of that kind of pluralism and peaceful coexistence and opportunity for all was promised. We made a lot of progress as a society, but the scourge of anti-Semitism persists here and around the world. It's a constant threat. We must remain vigilant always and work together to defeat it and all forms of intolerance and bigotry and hatred. So, Rabbi, thank you for your heroism, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with the committee and the Congress today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff, and I want to thank this panel. Dr. Kimbrough, thank you for coming. There weren't many questions sent your way, but believe me, your testimony on behalf of the historically black colleges and universities was heartfelt and acknowledged by many of the members. And we thank you for that. I'm sorry for what your students and faculty and administrators have experienced. And to the entire panel, the Rabbi, Detective Martinez, Mr. Carr, and Ms. Berry, thank you for joining us today. I have one thing I'm going to put into the record here for clarity. Senator Cornyn entered a brief into the record that had Assistant Attorney General Clarke's name on it. It related to lawsuit filed, Students for Fair Admission versus the President and Fellows of Harvard College. Senator Cornyn, I believe, was entering that in the record to indicate that Attorney General Clarke had actually been shown as a party to this lawsuit when she said otherwise before us. Turns out that the brief that was filed by Senator Cornyn was filed, for sure, but it was realized within 2 hours that it was mistaken, that her name should not have been included. So I'm asking consent to enter into the record the actual brief filed 2 hours later that is before the court, Supreme Court of the United States, and does not include Attorney General Clarke's name. Clearly a misunderstanding at the department level, which led to today's exchange. This corrected brief was filed after they realized the initial mistake. It is the correct brief. It does not include General Clarke's name. And we've entered it into the record at the request of the Department of Justice. And so, thank you all for being here and for patiently waiting for an opportunity to testify on this critically important issue. I'm afraid to say that it's likely to come back to us in many forms in the future, but that doesn't stop us from doing our job to make sure that all the crimes that are committed are accurately reported and responded to in an appropriate fashion. And as this last panel and the questioning that came to the panel reflected, that we also look beyond the crimes to the hate itself and decide how in America, in the world, we can do our best to moderate or alleviate it. Even though we know we'll never have a perfect solution, it's our God-given duty to do our best to try. So the hearing of this committee will stand adjourned, and I thank this panel again for their testimony.